Hello and good evening. Tonight's gentle journey takes us to how medieval pirates survived the coldest seas. Lower the volume, rest your eyes, and let the past be your lullaby. If this brings you peace, consider liking and subscribing only if it truly helps. And share in the comments where you're joining us from and the hour there. Now, lights down, a soft fan if you have one, and let's begin our walk through history. You step onto a deck that crunches like sugar under your boots. Frost has lacquered every plank. The sea is poured ink. The sky is a lid of slate. Wind threads your seams with clever needles and distills heat from your breath until it blossoms white and vanishes. Overhead, the sails hang rigid canvas turned to tin, creaking whenever the hull rolls. A lantern swings by the mainmast, a stubborn amber pupil refusing the dark. From below comes a wet, chest-deep cough, followed by a quick prayer to Saint Elmo, patron of sailors and the strange blue fire that sometimes kisses a mast in the storms. Gratitude or fear, you can't tell. Tar, brine, and old wool thicken the air. Somewhere a barrel has gone sour. The rigging is a spider web dipped in glass. You imagine men climbing into that web, bare hands on salt-stiff rope, knocking ice from lines before their weight bows a yard. Romance likes parrots and palms. The older truth is colder. Long before warm trades filled bright flags, raiders hunted nearer home up the channel, across the North Atlantic chop, through the Baltic lanes that fed Hanseatic ports. The world itself was cooling. Later centuries would call it the Little Ice Age. Harbors skinned over, nets froze to gunwales. Spray beaded on beards and buckles until metal kissed and clung to skin. Some mornings the North Sea went to slush, and the Baltic lay like plate glass. At the bow, the water looks almost solid. Pancake ice slides under the rail and ticks the strakes with a hollow ring. Beyond the horizon lie shuttered quays and anchored boats. Out here, there's only the cold, patient as a crewman who never sleeps. Ships of this century have no insulation and little mercy. Pitch cracks, seams gape, and the only blanket that matters is the weight of body packed close enough to trap a pocket of warmth. The lantern's circle turns frost on the rail to powdered stars. Somewhere aloft, a loose rope taps and taps one lonely percussion in an orchestra that never rests. Medieval ships talked in their sleep, wood sighing, cordage humming, canvas thrumming like a drumskin. Men learned that music until land silence felt wrong, their bones leaning for a phantom roll that would not come. You find the hatch? Honey-colored light leaks around its edges, promising warmth that isn't quite true, only air a degree kinder and far thicker. Below, men are huddled in knots, wrapped in whatever traps heat, coarse blankets, scraps of sailcloth, a priest's robe cut to a coat. One snores through the gap where teeth used to be. Another lies with his ear to the hull, listening to the ship's slow heart. Weapons rest within reach because even sleep is a negotiation with fear. Hammocks, when there are any, sway like cocoons. They sleep where the deck won't trample them between barrels, atop coils of hawser, under the lee of a bulkhead. A blanket counts as wealth. 2 blankets make a king. When the cold goes from guest to tyrant, survival depends on layers. Rough wool close, then linen, then anything is stitched or stolen, an old cassock for a hood, sailcloth for a windskin. Faces and hands get a rub of seal or whale oil, a slick, rank varnish that traps what little heat the body still makes. Up here, Polaris nails the sky, while Orion shoulders west. Old companions to anyone who lives by bells. The cold finds your teeth with a coin-bright taste. You rub your hands and think through the small, unheroic math. Breathe through a scarf or sleeve. Keep boots on to save minutes if the shout comes. Grease the knuckles, though it stinks like low tide. Vanity is a summer luxury. Underneath, layers do quiet work no ballad sings. And if there's fur to be had, it is worn with the humility of the living. Historians still argue whether pirates chose these winter routes or were dragged into them by chance and profit. The debate ebbs like tide. What's certain is this winter at sea makes accountants of heat and gamblers of sleep. A night without frostbite counts as comfort. At dawn, when the hull hasn't chewed itself open on drift ice, is grace. Warmth is measured in inches of cloth, of distance from a hatch, of space between your breath and another man's. Metal ticks in the dark. Someone knocking ice from a ring bolt. You think of a belt buckle kissing a skin, then tearing free. Above, a topman climbs anyway, lantern lit and rhymed white. Courage here is not a banner. It is the habit of going aloft, because if you don't, the sail will load wrong and none of you will see morning. Habit also lives in little rites. 2 taps on the mast before watch, a thumb brushed over a charm, a muttered bargain with St. Elmo warn us, light us, spare us. You trail a glove along the bulwark, rime powders under your touch. The ship answers movement with voice planks groan. Knees complain, tree nails whisper in their holes. Old shipwrights swore they could feel a vessel tense before weather, as a horse tenses before a bolt. Tonight she stands wary but mild. Lantern a patient pupil in a great cold face. The cold edits what matters. People who tell pirate stories skip this part. The wind that slices words in half. The deck turned blade. The way glamour shrivels to the size of a dry corner and a place to lay your skull. Truth lives in small things, a blanket tugged and retugged until 2 men surrender and share. A low hum to steady breathing. The unsleeping hand that keeps a thumb through a belt so no one steals the only covering he owns. Boots stay on. Knives sleep in reach. Nothing is soft unless it makes you warmer. Stand long enough and a lullaby surfaces inside the racket. The shrouds breathe in slow arcs. Thin cloud veils the constellations and draws away. The lantern swings. Frost beads flare and die. The sea cold, infinite, indifferent, pretends to sleep while it studies the deck for weakness. You study it back. The lesson these men live by is simple treasure, may be counted later. Tonight is about not being counted by the sea. Down the waist, a rope pops like a snapped icicle. A soft curse blooms and fades. Sound travels oddly in the freeze, thinning as if the night is sipping at it. You press your palm to the plank and feel the faintest tremor proof of water still moving under the skin of ice. Forward. Someone laughs once, brief as a spark, then coughs it away. Beneath your feet, life continues below, sardined asleep. Damp breath, a cradle-rocking motion that outlasts thought. You look up one last time. Orion blurs behind a veil, and your fingers have gone numb inside the gloves. You could climb down now into air that tastes of salt and smoke and men, into the dim where hammocks sway and talk dwindles to braided whisper. You could. But staying a little teaches the quiet rule the sea does not rage without pause. Mostly she waits. Waiting is the test. It has already taken your softness. It may decide tomorrow to take more. For now she allows you to pass. Lantern to lantern. As you turn, the ship shifts and wood answers wood, reminding you that the world beneath your boots floats. No flag cracks. No drum speaks. Only a poem of creaks and ghost silver frost, and the knowledge that survival happens the way timber endures winter by bending, by holding fast with what seems too small to matter a lamp, a layer of grease, a whispered prayer, and men who agree, if only for this night, to keep one another warm enough to see the morning. Down the ladder, the world narrows, and the air changes from knife cold to breath warm, a closeness of tar, wet wood, and bodies living cheek by jowl. The light is lantern thin, a slow gold that swings and paints rips of timber with moving shadows. Here the ship becomes a cave, and sleep, when it comes, is a bargain struck in dimness. They do not sleep on boards unless forced to. Ropes stretch from beam to beam, and from them hang their beds, narrow hammocks, like canvas cocoons, creaking in the ship's pulse. A hammock is a simple brilliance. The hull rolls, it rolls with it. The sea heaves. The man within is cradled rather than flung. Before these slings, men woke with bruised ribs or broken teeth when a hard wave punched the hull if they woke at all. After them, broken bones became fewer, and exhausted crews found minutes that counted. By the 16th century, the habit was everywhere a European sail went, its origins older and wiser than most captains would admit. Put your hand to the cloth, it is stiff with salt, rough enough to sand a palm. Along the edges, some have been aligned with a stolen sailcloth, others with a strip of hide or a scrap of fur hoarded from some winter raid. Anything that traps warmth gets stitched into place with tar-hardened thread. The smell inside a hammock is a small human weather smoke, wool, sweat, and the sour tang left by damp breath in a closed space. It is not pretty. It is proof that the body has refused the sea. Listen, each sling sings its own pitch, a soft whine from a dry rope, a low groan where wood chafes beam. The tick of a drip falling from the deck seems to a bucket someone has placed to catch it. The dripping never stops. Condensation beads on everything and crawls. In deep nights, the lantern flame cracks and shrinks when a draft snakes through a knot hole, and the shadows of sleeping men lengthen and shorten like tides. The ship sighs, and a dozen slings answer with a choir of canvas. There's a boy in the far corner, 15 perhaps. Rope burns across his small hands. The errand runner who climbs where grown men hesitate. He sleeps curled around his own elbows, knees to chest, boots still on because time is colder than air. Many like him never saw land again after their first winter out. For them, the lower deck is barracks and a schoolroom, punishment and shelter, the whole miserable universe rocking on a black sea. Sleep comes in pieces. 2 hours here, 1 there. Bells mark watches, and the bells cut dreams into ribbons. You will hear scholars argue about order on pirate decks, whether they held to strict rotations like Navy men or collapsed where they stood. The answer is the same as ever. It depends on the captain, on the weather, on how many knives sleep under blankets that night. Practicality wins. Enough to stay awake to keep a ship from drifting into a fatal mistake. The rest sink down wherever the wind cannot find a rib. Hammocks touch when the hull rolls. Privacy is the first luxury the sea strips from you. You learn your neighbor's breathing as if it were your own. You know which cough means fever and which only salt in the throat. You know who murmurs prayers to a saint or to a mother, who carries a weapon tied to his wrist with a cord so theft can't slip it away in half sleep. You learn not to steal another man's blanket. It has been done. Blood has answered. Cold makes small kindnesses into laws. A threadbare blanket is shared rather than fought over, not because tenderness rules, but because warmth wastes less when it stays in a pair of bodies. Now and then, men sleep back to back under one cloak, faces away and the spines aligned. Heat passed between them like a word you don't dare say aloud. The sea will kill your pride faster than it kills your fingers. Better the embarrassment of closeness than the silence of frost. They hum, no tune with words, usually only a breathy note, hummed under the lantern's swing to sand the edges off fear. A melody will pass from a sling to sling, change a little in each mouth, and fade. Some nights the ship seems to hum back, the timber vibrating with their low drone, the hull a chest through which several hearts find the same slow rhythm. When the wind climbs, a man with a good ear keeps time against his slung knife with a fingertip. Tap, 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 so the panic doesn't spool out into noise. Someone turns in his sleep and the hammock makes a lazy half spin, winding, then unwinding. Another snores like a saw. A third flinches and mutters, hand clenching around nothing. Even in dreams, he is hauling a line. At the bulkhead, a charm hangs where a knife point scratched at an eye, perhaps, or a crude fish, something cut by lamplight with the patience of long nights, meant to keep the ship sweet toward him. A thin ember glows inside a lidded iron pan. They will not call it a fire. Fire is the one God never allowed to board, but a coal carried in sand is a little mercy. The ember's orange pulse steadies hands too numb to tie a knot, and sometimes one man will sit out a watch just to keep it alive, nursing warmth with the devotion he once gave to coin. If the coal dies before dawn, no one says the word bad luck, but shoulders stiffen as if the sea had just cleared her throat. Food lingers in the air even when there is no meal in it. Salt beef is sweated in a pot, hard biscuit powdered into mush with a little warm water, and a pinch of something is stolen to fake sweetness. A strip of fat melted and rubbed into knuckles to stop skin splitting. Rum lives in the back of the throat, both comfort and tender. A mouthful of heat can loosen a cramped jaw enough to sleep, or it can spark the quarrel waiting in a stomach that has forgotten fruit. You can count all the miseries. You also count what they do to resist them. A scarf tied twice against the devil's fingers, a line of oil rubbed into rope to keep it from freezing, 3 men's shoulders pressed into one cloak. The rule that knives sleep within reach feels grim. It is also the rule that lets minds go slack enough to drift. Trust is never complete, but it can be wrapped in habit and laid on a hook for a few hours. Habit is how human beings pretend fear is furniture. There's a story all the sailors tell that below decks. The ship holds her breath when most of her crew sleep. The air grows heavy and still, and for a few minutes the vessel seems to wait with its people, listening for what the sea will try next. If you stand very still, you can believe it. The lantern hardly moves, the drip slows, the timbers go quiet, and you feel suspended in a warm pocket where the ocean cannot find you. Then a wave shoulders the hull, everything sways, and the world begins again with a creak, a cough, a man turning over and whispering a name that's older than his crimes. Hammocks end quarrels before they start. A sling keeps a man from crashing into his neighbor when the ship lurches, and it corrals a drunk into a narrow, swaying cradle where he can do no harm but to his pride. It stores with a flip, clears a deck in minutes when the alarm bell sounds, and strings back up just as fast when danger passes. No carpenter ever built a wiser piece of furniture for a moving house. Outside, the cold is sharpening knives of wind. Here it is a damp hand on your cheek. The damp has teeth. It gnaws morale if you let it. So stories are stitched into the night with the same care that the stitches patched their makeshift bedding. He raided a wine ship off Flanders. She with the red scarf in Bergen, a miracle in a storm, a light on the wave that no one can agree about in the morning. The tales keep the cold from crawling into the corners of the mind where despair nests. They turn fear into something with shape and a plot, and that makes it smaller. You pause by one sling where a man's arm dangles, big-knuckled and scored with rope burns. His fingers twitch as though the deck has just heaved under him. In the sleep, the sea stays. It stays in the inner ear and in the muscle memory of hands. On a land, after months out, these same hands will reach for a wall that does not move and stagger when it holds still. But that is later. For now, the ship rocks its thousands of hours into the hull, and the men accept the trade. We will move with you, and you will not take us this night. A drop falls, another, a soft laugh, then a hush. The lantern lifts and dips, and canvas breathes in 30 different pitches. In this place beneath the frost, survival is not a spectacle, but craft. It is the art of slinging a bed from a ceiling and learning to sleep inside a cradle that rocks not like a mother's, but like a world that does not care. It is the art of letting fear doze with a knife's hilt under your fingers. It is the art of choosing to be a small animal with other small animals, sharing heat without asking names. When you climb back toward the hatch, the air grows colder, cleaner, and cruel again. But you carry the lower deck with you, the knowledge that somewhere inches beneath your boots, the ship has gathered its people into pockets of warmth and given them a way to float in the dark. Above, the rigging will ice and the sails go to iron. Below, 100 small beds will rise and fall together, and men will dream in fragments. Between those worlds, the vessel endures, not by grandeur, but by these small, stubborn arrangements that make the difference between a tale and a name carved on a beam with a knife. Follow the smell smoke thinned by salt air, fat burned down to a sweet bitterness, tar warmed just enough to loosen its scent, and you find the galley, the ship's narrow, blackened hearth. The passage tightens, the deck beams lower their foreheads, and the light shrinks to a lantern's pulse. Inside, heat is a cautious thing. It lives in embers no larger than a fist, cupped by iron and a stone, watched with a reverence that borders on fear. Everything here remembers fire. The walls are tarred wood. The ropes drip salt. The deck sweats pitch. A spark can turn all of it into a wick, so the flame is bridled. A squat hearth stones braced with the strapped iron, floor lined with sand holds a guarded glow. No leaping tongues, no cheerful blaze. A lid rests to one side, ready to smother. A bucket of sand waits like a sentry. Another, wet and rope-handled, waits beside it. An axe for cutting away burning timber hangs within reach, blade oiled, haft worn smooth where too many hands have tested its balance in the dark. They cook on this reluctance. A copper kettle, dented and wrapped with rope at the handle to save fingers. Size with a thin simmer. A pan, black as a moonless sky, holds scraps that pass for a stew shaved salt beef. Onions if piracy or luck has been kind, biscuit pounded to crumbs with the butt of a knife. The smell is bigger than the meal. Men draw closer not because the food is rich, but because it is hot, and because heat is a language their bodies have not heard enough of. Metal ticks, fat spits. A wrapper of steam drifts toward the ladder and dies where the wind cuts it in two. No captain needs to post the rule. Every sailor knows it without words. No open flame on deck. No wandering lamp. No dramatics with tinder. Oil lamps here are throttled, their wicks pinched low. Whale or seal oil making a small, steady halo, and a soot that paints every beam with a soft velvet grime. A brazier sometimes rides to windward under an iron hood, but only when the sea is kind, and the sea is almost never kind in this cold. So they make do with the hearth and a handful of tricks that turn a breath of warmth into an hour. Watch one of those tricks now. An iron pot as wide as a man's hand, half filled with stones that have slept on the hearth edge, lid tied down with cloth. A pirate wraps the pot in a rag and tucks it into the crook of his elbow as if it were a child. He disappears down ladder into the hammocks, and the warmth goes with him, an itinerant ember that will thaw 3 pairs of fingers and the edge of a stiff rope before it gives up its ghost. Another pot follows, this one filled with sand warm as bread. The lids rattle as the ship breathes. The heat lasts longer than you'd think. The smell comes back richer, tinged with scorched cloth, a scent that means someone cared enough to carry heat to those who could not leave their watch. They have tried bolder measures. A heated shot iron from the gun, rolled in sand, lowered with tongs into a lidded chest, glows like a small planet for an hour. It is madness and mercy at once. One bump, one loose plank, and the ship becomes a torch. But on the bleakest nights, men who have watched frost take a tow will risk anything for warmth that reaches bone. Such experiments are rare, talked about more than they are repeated. Yet the story of them flickers here half warning, half prayer every time the coals burn low. Look at their faces in this light. The lamp's gold takes the ash out of their skin and leaves behind the map of winter, the chapped lips, the split knuckles rubbed with grease to keep skin from opening like paper. They stretch their hands toward the iron plate, palms up as if begging. One holds a tin cup close enough to catch the ghost of a boil. Another rubs his wrists where wet wool bit and would not let go. Their breath ghosts in the air and vanishes. For a few minutes, talk softens. The voice that barks orders on deck drops its shoulders. A joke lives long enough to make it around the room. Someone taps the side of the kettle where a trinket dangles a little fish carved from driftwood, oiled to a shine, a charm against fire. Fingers touch it as they pass, the way you might touch a doorway for luck. The food is not comfort so much as arithmetic. Salted beef is gray even when hot. It needs a soaking the way a wound needs binding. Biscuit softens in a swallow of warm water or rum and becomes a porridge that pretends to be bread. If you close your eyes, peas will thicken into something that sits in the belly and reminds it to work. A crumble of sugar, a scrape of fat, a pinch of mustard filched from a merchant's locker. Each is a kind of forgiveness for the tongue. 1 spoonful is heat, 2 is memory, 3 is enough to convince your hands to obey rope and wind. Listen to the galley's music, not the screech of the storm, but a domestic composition, the long breath of something simmering, a careful stir, the tiny snap where a sap-blessed splinter in the kindling gives up its last bright life, the clack of tin against wood, the small purr of the ship's cat, whose ears insist on being near any place where warmth gathers. This is the one room aboard where the sea's vastness pauses at the threshold. In here, even the ocean's voice lowers. They mind the smoke as much as the flame. A cross draft helps hatch cracked. Companionway propped, and a man at the door judges by eye when the air has grown too thick for lungs to ignore. Charcoal will smolder clean if it's dry. Green wood will punish you for impatience. Too much smoke, and heads ache, eyelids drop, thoughts slow, and mistakes breed. Men have died in fair weather near a generous fire. They have no intention of letting a stingy one take them in foul. The galley is also a courtroom where silence and quarrels share the bench. Rum moves in a circle, a swallow from a bottle wrapped in rope. Past right, not left. So habit keeps peace. The heat loosens old grievances and, sometimes, old songs. A few bars of a tune from Plymouth or a Stavanger blur into a hum the way flavor blurs into broth. Somebody remembers a tavern and says nothing. Somebody else scrapes his spoon along the bowl to find a last lentil. A line of steam escapes when the lid lifts, and men lean into it like flowers to weak sun. Tools here are old friends with new names. A gimbal would be luxury. This stove is bolted hard to a frame and trusted to the helmsman's hands. Hooks hammered into a beam keep a kettle from walking across the hearth. A pair of iron tongs shine where bare hands have learned not to try courage on hot metal. A length of soaked canvas hangs ready to blanket a wayward spark. The cook's knife is notched from boning tough meat and prying lids, and he keeps its edge on a whetstone the way a gunner keeps powder dry. There are rules older than anyone aboard. No lamp uncovered in a squall, no pipe near a sail, no coals carried without a lid and a prayer. Coals are named, not allowed names are secrets here, but in the way men talk about them. Keep the heart alive. They mean the ember, they mean the ship, they mean themselves. If the glow fails, shoulders tighten, voices sharpen, and every man listens harder to the black beyond the hull as if the sea, seeing no spark inside, might be tempted to extinguish them wholesale. Now and then the wind's voice comes down the ladder and bullies all of this into quiet. A gust pushes the flame sideways, A lantern gutter flashes and steadies. Men turn their heads in the same motion, as if they share a neck. Above, a shudder runs through the masts. The ship flexes, and hot water leaps from a lip, hissing when it finds cold wood. A laugh answers a tired, crooked laugh that says the sea is jealous. Someone repeats it, and for a breath, the galley is warmer for the sound. You could call what happens here survival, but that word is grander than the practice. The practice is tending a coal as if it were a king. It is wrapping the handle of a kettle so the next hand does not blister and become useless on a line. It is rationing fat for fingers and lamps rather than for flavor. It is knowing when to smother and when to coax, when to close the lid and when to lift it for one long exhale that drifts down the ladder and reminds a frozen deck that heat still exists. And then, as quickly as warmth gathers, it thins, the pot empties, the pan goes quiet, the lamp is pinched to a point, men pull their coats close again, the glow retreats to a stubborn coal the size of a thumb and holds. One of them leans forward, careful, and stirs the ash to make sure something red remains. When he sees it breathe, he nods, and the room exhales with him. Outside, the rigging hums, the bell will ring, work will drag them out into the knife light. But the ember stays, a small, beating fact that says, not yet, not tonight. There is still fire in the belly of this wooden thing, and men enough to share it. The ship never sleeps. When the decks go dark and men vanish into hammocks, like cocoons hung from a forest of beams, something else wakes the rhythm that keeps a wooden world alive. It's measured not by clocks, but by breath and bell, the soft strike that trembles through frostbitten air, the turning of a sand glass whose throat whispers as each grain falls. Watch begins when the last echo dies. Out on the quarterdeck, a lantern is hooded to a thin gold ring, enough to show the wheel and little more. The helmsman's hands, cracked and stiff, find their grip by memory, knuckles white within a stiffened gloves. He holds a line with his eye, a ghost of a compass bearing a scratched-in grease, then looks up to the dark where mast and rigging ladder into the sky. A second figure leans near, the night's listener, straining for ice, for a change in water's voice, for the telltale hiss that means a reef has come prowling out of nowhere. Below, the bell is struck once, the sound clean as cold iron. A man turns the half-hour gloss, its shadow narrows, time resumes. 2 strikes follow, then 3, and every answer loosens or tightens the crew in their hammocks. No one counts minutes at sea. They count bells, and the end of a watch is 8 of them, a small mercy in 4s and halves that keeps a ship from drowning in its own hours. The bell is discipline and lullaby. It announces both your relief and your debt. On deck, those who are up court wakefulness with ritual. They stamp their boots to coax heat from wood. They slap their arms. They hum the stitch of some portside tune. They click a spoon against barrel in a slow measure that keeps fingers nimble and minds from sliding off the world's edge. When the wind falls away to nothing, they sing not words, but breath, a low, round sound that blends with the masts speaking. The sea can make a soul too quiet. They set their own noise against it. There's a language of silence, too. The man at the wheel jerks his chin, look there. The lookout nods, I see it, the pale ghost of a floe, the astray light that could be a star in the water or another lantern in moving fog. Orders come as gestures. Assent comes as work, a dipped shoulder into a line, a twist of the wrist to ease a block, a tug to take the strain just as the ship rolls. You learn the grammar of this without thinking, or you don't stay. Every body grows bilingual in motion. After a week of watches, even men asleep anticipate a lurch. The ship leans into a swell and hammocks swing first to greet it. Spines soften precisely when they must. It goes deeper than habit. Take such men ashore and they sway on level ground. Legs deciphering phantom decks, they reach to steady themselves on furniture that will not move. The sea teaches and the body remembers. What a watch owes is attention. The wheel wants hands. The sky wants eyes. The lines want tending. Someone moves along the leeward rail with a hand on each shroud, feeling the rigidity of frozen rope and listening for that treacherous note. A stiff line plays before it parts. Someone else checks lashings at the boats, the hatches, the barrels that might decide to walk if a sudden sea lifts them. Cold kills quickly when it finds a mistake. You look or you pay, and all of it is arranged inside a pattern older than any man aboard ours parceled out. Relief set against exhaustion. There are names: first watch, middle watch, morning watch. But here, in the longest cold, names blur. What matters is the exchange, your 4 hours for theirs, their 4 for yours. Some nights, rotation is as strict as a captain's ledger. Other nights, chaos wins, and men collapse in corners, jolted awake when the bell tells them mercy has run out. The line between order and need thins the farther north you go. Little inventions creep in to keep the rhythm human. A token passes with a change, a carved bead, a button, a scrap of rope knotted thrice tied to a wrist when you take your place. You touch it when your courage slips. When you hand it off, you let go of the night's weight. It's not magic. It is something simpler and a stranger, a proof that you aren't the first to stand in this cold, and you won't be the last. There's also the glass. It sits in its gimbal cradle, a narrow waste of hours measured in sand. Every half hour, a hand turns it. Every turning is a promise your turn will end, your friend will come. Beside it, a short slat notched with small cuts keeps tally of the bells when mind and muscle grow dull. Men call it the memory stick, and in bitter wind they trust wood more than they trust their own thoughts. The work inside a watch is a string of small salvations. The sails leach ices and someone goes aloft, knife between teeth. Body a dark seam pressed against pale frost. The lantern gutter hums, and a mittened hand shelters it instinctively. Even a timid flame is a companion. A seam weeps along the deck, and a wedge is knocked in with the tender violence of carpenters. The sound rings up the mast like a bell. Every act has shape and tempo, and when it's done well, the ship's voice changes, less complaint, more cooperation. You can feel how the cold teaches thrift of motion. Nothing wasted, nothing grand. A man learns to coil a line with hands that barely open, to listen for the difference between wood protesting and wood warning, to share breath without taking face or name from the man next to him. They speak without speaking, the touch on a sleeve that means duck, the heel set against a cleat that says hold, the slow tap on the rail that admits I am tired, stay close. Down ladder, the off watch tries to sleep through this orchestra of care. A bell thins their dreams, and they turn to a new side. The ship rolls. Hammocks answer in chorus. There is mutter, a cough, the short cry someone makes when a dream puts him back in a storm he would rather forget. Then quiet, except for rope and sea and wood in its cradle. How many hours enough? Never enough. The historians who try to weigh these nights in neat measures, so many hours on, so many off, miss what the men understand. A ship is not a clock. It is an animal that trades its needs with yours. Tonight, it gives you a steady wind, but takes your toes feeling. Tomorrow, it gives you calm, but takes your bearing. The watch is a bargain, paid in breath. At the liminal hour, the one that isn't night anymore but isn't morning, yet the cold works its meanest tricks. Fingers forget how to be fingers. Minds wander toward the warmth of stories and don't return quickly. That's when the humming starts again, or the tapping, or the nonsense syllables spoken like prayer to keep thought tethered. Someone recites a list of harbors, someone else the names of lovers, and between each name the bell punctuates 4, 5, 6, a line of time tugged hand over hand. Then the sky destabilizes, not with a storm, but with light. A thin bruise of gray climbs the far edge of the world. You can hear the ship notice it every spar, giving one soft, settling sigh. The man at the wheel blinks tears from wind-raw eyes and sees the horizon reappear where it belongs. The lookout straightens, less from duty than from relief. The bell rings 7, then 8, and the watch breaks like thin ice. Gloves thump backs. The token changes wrists. A voice, hoarse but human, says, "Your deck." And for a heartbeat, the sea feels like it has agreed to the arrangement. The new men come up from the warmth below squinting, their hair showing frost's faint glitter. They smell of smoke and wool and the animal closeness of sleep. One splashes his face with a dipper of sea water and gasps, then grins. Another takes the glass, turns it carefully, and taps it once to set the sand moving true. The old watch goes down, bodies unwinding toward hammocks, listening to the deck with a sixth sense even as leads lower. The ship continues. She always does. The bell will call again, the glass will thin, the wheel will pull like a stubborn thing that would rather choose its own path. But for a sliver of time, the turning between watches, the deck holds two worlds at once. Men returning from the dark with salt stiff in their beards. Men arriving to meet it with eyes that still remember sleep. Between them passes a bead, a button, a scrap of rope. Between them passes the breath of a sailing life, unbroken by cold, measured in bells, and stitched tighter than any seam by the simple fact that one set of hands lets go because another set has taken hold. Night returns like an old ache, and with it comes the single heat the ship will allow a bottle passed hand to hand, its glass sweating frost, its throat breathing fire. The men gather by instinct around the small islands of light lanterns hooded to keep the flame tame, and for a few breaths, the cold is a story told about someone else. The smell goes first sharp and sweet, molasses and the smoke for those who have stolen sugar spirits, sour grape for a keg of wine turned rough on the voyage, harsh apple or plum when the prize was northern and the stingy, sometimes brandy, sometimes aqua vitae, strong water taken off a Hansei ship and guarded like medicine. Names don't matter once it burns. The liquid walks their chests in a line of heat, and shoulders drop as if unstringed. No one toasts loudly on a night like this. The cups are dented tin, the measure uneven. A mouthful might be mercy, a second swallow, courage, a third, trouble. They have learned the arithmetic of drink, and they do it anyway. A man tips a portion into a wooden ladle and swirls in a thumb of water to stretch it, to soften the shock brine if the cask is low, snow if the weather is kind. Later centuries will dignify the mixture with names, but sailors in any age know that thinning the fire lets it last and keeps hands steady enough to tie what must be tied. The first sip carries a hiss from the throat, a laugh that isn't quite joy. The lanterns wobble on their hooks with the ship's breathing. The light settles over faces like a thin warmth you could almost mistake for summer. Talk wakes, not the bragging kind that belongs to docks and afternoons. This is the slow river of stories told to keep darkness from inventing its own. A raid that went right and never will again. A winter remembered for worse ice than this. A harbor girl who let you steal 2 kisses and a loaf. The bottle goes round, and each man borrows a minute of another's heat. One hums a tune so low it's more a vibration in his ribs than a melody, and boots begin to tap the deck in time, a drummer's pulse to hold their thoughts together. In the corner, someone clicks a spoon on tin in a steady heartbeat. Rhythm is warmth you don't have to share. Yet drink is a double-edged knife. It blunts fear, and then it blunts sense. Fingers feel bolder than they are. Judgment turns slippery. The same man who made a joke about the helmsman's hat an hour ago now thinks it was an insult, and the look he gives in return is a flint waiting for a steel. The crew knows this pattern. They watch the fuse and keep silent. On land, a fight is a sport. At sea, a fight is a hole in the hull waiting to happen. The bottle comes round again, and a hand holds it a heartbeat too long. The deck tightens, every eye not quite looking until the cook, with the authority of a man who feeds the last bit of heat to the ship each night, wraps the kettle with a ladle. The note is flat and tired, but it is a bell of its own, and the moment phrase, instead of snaps, what they cannot burn, they invent. Someone suggests a trick he swears by rub a fingerful of oil whale, seal, even lamp across the knuckles before sleep, trap a little warmth under the skin. It stinks. It works. Another swears that a pebble kept in the mouth on deck keeps your breath from freezing your teeth. He's mocked gently until they remember his teeth are still there. There's talk of hot drinks that cannot be made here possets, and ale warmed at a home hearth, and of the way a heated stone dropped into a mug will coax a ghost of that life into the present. Fire is a jealous god aboard a wooden world, but they have learned to borrow its smallest miracles. Superstition creeps in with the steam. A man spills his measure, and instead of swearing, he kneels and lets the rest dribble through his fingers over the side. For the poor drowned, he says, and the others nod. No one laughs. The sea remembers everything. It is wise to prove you remember, too. A second man draws a line of salt on the deck with his fingertip and breaks it. Twice, the way his grandmother taught him to cut a run of bad luck. You can smell the sharpness of it when his damp hand rises. The cat, who has accepted that she owns the ship, steps delicately around the line and curls against a boot, gathering men the way coals gather ash. A low debate rumbles, does drink warm or steal warmth? Everyone has an answer, and each one is true for the man who gives it. The first mouthful is summer. The next is a lantern in your chest that draws every draft in the ship to find it. It makes you brave, someone says, and a voice in the dim replies until the sea asks you a hard question. They all know the questions. They drink anyway because a little borrowed courage buys a few hours' sleep. There are nights when a song is not a choice, but a duty. The wind has died until the world feels padded with wool, and the cold presses the skull like a band of iron. A voice starts, not a shanty for hauling, but something with a long, soft keel to it, a tune that was once a prayer in a chapel, and before that, a chant to a god with antlers. Now only a string of vowel and breath to keep the mind from sliding. Others join, each carrying a line he half remembers from some other coast. The deck fills with that low weaving, and the lantern flame settles as if soothed. Men who cannot sleep use song as a blanket. Men who must stay awake use it as a walking stick. Trouble finds them anyway. Two mugs thud together too hard. One knocks the other to the planks. A curse jumps like a spark. The closest hands move quickly, not to restrain but to distract. Here, take the last heel of biscuit. Hold this line while I wrap it. Did you hear the flow scrape just now? They change the story before the story changes them. One of the quarreling men is young, the other too tired to remember he is strong. The cook raps the kettle again. The captain's shadow fills the hatchway and then disappears. A presence granted, so no order has to be given. Shame is a cheaper coin than punishment and dispense better. The bottle is nearly gone. When it reaches the helmsman, he touches the rim to his lip and no more, then tips a drop to the deck. For the keel, he murmurs, men who live with wood learn to court it like a temperamental mare. This one has carried them through ice and tantrums, and might be asked for more tomorrow. A blessing cannot hurt. The last swallow is handed to the oldest hand on board. He closes his eyes as if remembering a summer orchard none of them will ever see, and lets it fall down his throat like a small sun. Enough, he says, and the word loosens the knot at the night's center. After drink comes the reckoning with sleep. It does not come sweet. Alcohol shaves the edges off fear but sharpens dreams. A man who slid easily into the hammock last night now startles awake at every slap of rope, fighting a wave that isn't there. Another dreams of a hearth fire and wakes sweating in air that freezes the wet on his skin. There are remedies of a sort. Lie on your side with knees drawn. Wrap your scarf not across the mouth but under the chin. Keep your knife close because your mind will insist on danger, and better to satisfy it than argue in the dark. Someone tells an old tale, no ghosts, no monsters, just a list of ports in summer, beaches in light, and lets the litany close their eyes for them. The last work of the bottle is in the morning. Heads are thick, hands are clumsy, tempers flare with no spark at all. The deck has no patience for it, and neither does the cold. A thin breakfast, a splash of brine across the face, the bell calling the day to order, and the night's warmth is already a rumor. You can see its fingerprint, though, in the way the men move a little nearer to one another at the rail, shoulders touching between jobs, laughter shorter but easier. Drink did not make them brave or kind. It reminded them for a few hours what those words feel like. One of them finds a scrap of bright cloth in his pocket, a ribbon torn from a town he barely remembers. He ties it around the neck of the bottle before stowing it, a silly flare of color in a world of tar and frost. For luck, he says. Another tucks a sliver of citrus peel, stolen from a captain's store weeks ago, into the lamp's warm base, just to smell summer rise for a breath. These gestures are not useful, and they are what keep a crew human in a place that prefers the opposite. By the time the sun, thin, reluctant, presses a paler gray into the horizon, the night's heat has gone wherever such things go. The sea is unchanged iron in the rigging, black glass under the bow, but the men have been bent a degree away from the cold and toward one another. And sometimes a degree is the difference between breaking and flexing. Later, when the stories are traded in ports where fires are legal and cups are generous, they will talk about the night the sky burned green or a storm that taught them their smallness. Few will mention the quiet mercy of a bottle passed slow around a ring of breath in winter. But anyone who has stood a watch and taken that a swallow will know that between frost and fear, there was a narrow road called company, and for a while they walked it warm. By the time the bottle sleeps, the men try to. The ship softens its voice to a low, patient breathing, the hush of water against the hull, the tired tick of cordage, the lanterns purring in their glass. Hammocks begin to fill one by one, pale cocoons slung from beams that is sweat with cold. Sleep here is not a warm descent, but a bargain struck in darkness. You give the sea your vigilance for an hour, and in return it gives you a brief forgetting. They dream the way hungry men eat with urgency, without manners. Land comes first. It comes as a hearth that throws orange on plaster, a lane that doesn't move beneath the feet, a crooked tavern sign whining in a wind that smells of bread instead of salt. Old markets return, like hymns, copper pans, braids of onions, apples not turned to vinegar in barrels. Someone's mother hums, a hand on a boy's hair, though the man wearing the memory is long past boyhood and far from her hand. The cold can't follow into these rooms, not at first. Then the dream betrays them. The floor tilts, walls breathe like bellows. The doorway lengthens into rigging. A loaf becomes a coil of rope. A bed becomes a hammock that swings too fast. The heart flares white like lightning and flicks out. He wakes with his mouth full of salt and the taste of a smoke he never had. There are rules in the dark. Men who joke easily with knives grow quiet over certain omens. Fire in winter dreams is one of them. You will hear it whispered. At mess flames are fever. Flames are battle. Flames are the last light a ship sees from within. Nobody says he believes it. Nobody laughs when it's said. One fellow shakes himself awake, swears he smelled tallow burning, and won't close his eyes again until the watch is changed. Another, hard-faced, asks the cat to settle by his hammock guard the dream. He mutters, and the creature obliges, a small, steady warmth pressed to his ribs. Sleep does not come whole. These are fragments stitched to a moving frame, A man closes his eyes and drops, sudden as a stone, 2 minutes. 4. Not long enough to soften the ache in shoulders, then jerks up at the slap of a frozen line, listening for what the sound is and isn't. Another learns the ship's lullaby count, 6 creaks. Breathe, count 6 more. When the count strays, he opens his eyes to make sure the world hasn't slid off its rails. The old hands teach small arts. Don't wrap the scarf over your mouth or the linen will freeze. Do tuck it under the chin and keep breath warm along the throat. Turn the knife hilt inward under your blanket so the dream that wants danger finds it prop and calms. The mind, starved and overworked, makes its own weather. There are nights when 2 hammocks share the same story. A murmur passes down the row. Did you hear the bell? Though the bell has not rung. Someone sees a woman on the ladder, skirts dragging a wet shadow. Another hears oars striking water where there is only ice. Later, on land, learned men will call it monotony, malnutrition, the brain turning the ship's rhythm into visions. But here, in the hour before dawn, it feels like a tide of thoughts crossing the deck together. Not madness, companionship of a stranger kind. A boy breathes too fast. His mouth makes the shape of a word he cannot bring across. The hammock beside him sways closer. A thick hand reaches, finds his shoulder in the dark, squeezes once. Think of Sunday bells, the voice says. And without seeing faces, they trade their shared trick, tell the mind a path home before it can build a road to panic. A list helps ports in order, capes in sequence, saints' names for each watch. Men who cannot read learn to recite like monks. The cadence ties their thoughts to something that does not lurch. Some insist on sleeping under the open mouth of the night. A crewman with a scar like a crooked stitch down his cheek has taken to wrapping himself in a strip of sailcloth on deck, head pillowed on a coil of wet rope. Below, he says, the dreams are too heavy with people. Up here, the stars hold you light. The others call him ghost lover and leave him to it, until the morning he does not rise with the bell, and a smear of ice on the rail tells the rest of the tale. For a week, nobody sleeps on deck. For a month, nobody jokes about ghosts. Hammocks creak in counterpoint. If you lie still and let the sound stack on itself, you can pretend you are inside some great breathing bellows, the ship expanding and settling in a rhythm older than any man aboard. The wood has memory. Someone once carved 4 small notches above his bed, one for each winter survived, and the points polish with every swing, as though the hull itself keeps count. A sailor wakes from a dream of bees and finds that it is only rain hissing faint on the hatch. He smiles, lets the imagined honey soften the taste of brine on his tongue, and falls again. The watch below murmurs themselves toward rest with long vowels and slow consonants. It isn't quite tune, it isn't a speech. Northmen use it with words they won't translate. Britons make it sound like sea prayer. English tongues blur it into hum. It keeps the lungs even and the heart from sprinting against nothing. If someone begins too loud, the others hush him. With a shared gesture, 2 fingers tap twice on the beam above, meaning softer, friend. The dark has ears. Fever has its own grammar. In the sick corner, a man talks to a woman not here, folds air like linen, thinks he's mending a shirt. Vinegar rubbed on the temples cuts the stink. So does a rag kept near a lantern to breathe in warm air. They tried the old cures because they came with them. From land tie a charm where you sleep, a scrap of ribbon, a saint's medal, a knotted a string with a bit of bone. The string is just a string. The bone is just bone. But the hand that touches it in the night is a steadier, and that is medicine enough. Above their heads, a drop beats a tin pan with the regularity of a metronome. It is a leak caught in a bucket, the ship's patience made audible. Sleepers fold the sound into their dreams. The man on watch curses it. The cook, waking, counts without meaning to 21, 22, 23. Numbers are another blanket proof that a pattern still holds, even in a world that would prefer to be made only of accident. There's a tale the older hands tell when the dark grows long. A ship in waters like these, men drifting toward the edge of asleep and sense, and then a light moving as slow as thought along the bulwark, a blue answering fire clinging to rope and a spar. They swear it comforted more than frightened, that some lights mean you have been seen, and that being seen is a kind of safety. Younger men pretend not to listen. Later, when the air scratches with frost and the rigging hisses, a faint glow will lick a yard arm, and a dozen sleepers will sigh at once, unknowingly, as if a mother had opened a door and leaned her shadow into the room. Sometimes the ship dreams back. You can hear it in the way her timbers answer one another. A moan in the bow echoed 3 heartbeats later near the astern. A lazy knock underfoot that repeats, a whole body sound like a violin being tuned. A man half asleep swears the deck rises to meet his breath. Another cannot shake the sense that the hull wants him to choose the steadier rhythm and not the wild one. And so he does. The line between self and vessel blurs in winter. In the morning, you might say you felt the ice before you saw it. In the night, you will say nothing, but you will sleep where the frame says it is safe. Dreams trade in debts. A sailor who sits up shouting wakes ashamed and tries to laugh. The next night, he will take another's watch without being asked. A man who sleeps too long to his share, rare. But it happens when the cold loosens its grip just enough, finds a tin cup by his hand with the scalding dregs of something sweet and black the cook dared to make. Drink, someone says, not looking. No one keeps score aloud because the sea does it for them. Toward dawn, the temperature falls like a thrown knife. The lanterns are halos smaller than a hand. Frost writes its secret alphabet on steel. Dreams thin. The mind begins to climb toward the surface where work lives. You can hear the change in the breathing of the hold, the way a snoring breaks, the little cough before a man tries his voice, the hush that is not silence but readiness. Sleep lets go with reluctance. Fatigue clings harder. The bell will ring and slice the morning into hours. Before it does, one more minute of the ship's old music, one more minute of a world where a man can be on a shore he will never see again, and also on a deck he cannot leave. When the bell finally speaks, the hammocks give up their occupants like cocoons splitting. Boots find planks. Voices come back from far places to the mouths that own them. No one mentions what he saw or who he loved in the dark. The sea does not honor such talk with patience, but it leaves marks the softened eye, the fisherman's knot tied without thinking, the hand that checks a pocket for a token and finds it. The night's work because sleep here is labor. 2 is done. The day's begins, and the thin gray between them holds for a breath, long enough to know that between frost and fear, a man can still find a country inside his head and come back from it, ready to pull. Morning arrives like a pale coin slipped under the door cold light, no warmth attached. The bell's tongue taps the hour, and from the hammocks, men unspool themselves, slow and careful, as if they might crack along old seams. Breath plumes. Fingers remember rope before they remember names, and then, like iron shavings drawn to a magnet, they drift toward the galley, the ship's smallest room and its largest promise. The cook is there already, a bulky silhouette in a steam, sleeves rolled to the elbow, forearms latticed with old burns. On a winter ship, a cook is less tradesman than the steward of a spirits. He is the one who coaxes heat out of nothing, who turns sameness into tolerable, who understands that men can endure cold if their mouths remember warmth for a heartbeat. His fire is no roaring hearth. It's a guarded glow, a squat brazier boxed in with iron plates. A coal heart fed by scraps of tarred rope and drift of charcoal. Kept low because wood ships fear flame like wolves. The pot above does not boil so much as murmur. He listens to that murmur the way the helmsman listens to wind. What he has is what the sea has permitted to last ship's biscuit, rock-hard wheels stamped months ago and baked to a dryness that defeats rot but not weevils, salt beef and pork sleeping in their own brine, dried peas like green stones, barrels of a stockfish that smell of 100 winters on the Lofoten racks, a keg of a small beer, soured to a bite. Rum only by measure, yesterday emptied enough courage for today. The water in the casks is clean in name more than taste ropey. The men call it when it threads like egg white, thick with what wood releases to time. Still, it wets the tongue, and that is a kind of mercy. He starts with the oldest trick, soften the past. 2 biscuits bred in speech only are cracked with a mallet on a flat of oak, the sound like dull musketry. He tips the shards into a pan and drowns them with the last spoon of black strap and a splash of a small beer, stirs until the mixture loosens from misery into something that might remember porridge, duff. Someone calls it out of habit, though sweat is a summer rumor now. He grinds a pinch of mustard seed between thumb and palm stolen from a merchant's chest months back and dusts the top. The smell is sharp enough to wake the mouth before the heat reaches the hand. Salt beef hisses in a second pot, the brine leaching into gray water. He soaked the strip overnight, changed the water twice, saving the cleanest for a last blanch. Even so, the meat shines like varnished leather and cuts with argument. A man at the door watches it with a gambler's stare and then looks away. Meat makes some men remember hunger too clearly. Dried peas go in next, a double handful that vanishes in the fog and will take hours to surrender. Were this a saint's day, there might be onions or a knuckle of garlic tucked away like contraband. Not today. The cook lifts the lid of a third pot and lets steam kiss his face, counting 1, 2, 3, and drops a strip of a stockfish to soften. The smell that rises could curl a lesser crew, but these men know truth when they smell it. Winter food is honest, no lies of spice, no false promises. It tells you exactly what it is, salt and patience. They eat in a ring that isn't a ring. backs to bulkheads, knees touching barrels, hands cupped around tin that steals heat like a thief. No one waits for blessing. The blessing is that the spoon doesn't break. A man dips biscuit in the thin stew until it gives up, then eats the slurry fast, afraid his teeth will remember themselves and complain. Another rubs his ration with rum to persuade it toward mercy. A trick learned from a man who learned it from another who swore it could make even a plank taste of molasses. Someone cracks his biscuit on the heel of a knife and watches a pale weevil tumble out. He flicks it to the deck with a fingernail, shrugs, and keeps eating. You do not starve out of pride. Talk at breakfast is different from talk at dusk. At dusk, men make noise to push back dark. In this gray beginning, they keep their voices small, saving them for rope. The cook's hum is the loudest thing, an old air from a port that might not exist anymore. A boy sits with his back to a pillar, both hands wrapped around a tin too large for him, blowing steam off it with his life. Across from him, a veteran with a mouth like a scar softens his face for 3 swallows, the closest he will come to prayer today. Bodies fail in winter by inches, and the bowl is where the truth shows first. Gums that bleed at the scrape of salt beef, edges of all the scars that flower purple where they should be pale, knees that don't uncurl without bargaining. No one here knows the word scurvy as a physician would use it, but every man can recite its sermon: soft teeth, heavy legs, a sadness that sits in the bones like damp. So they hoard small hopes, dried berries, 1 in a raid, and rationed like relics, 3 to a man for a feast day. Spruce tips boiled when the coast offers a leaning tree. Bitter needles turn to tea that tastes of the north wind itself. Sauerkraut is a foreign sailor's rumor. Citrus belongs to saints' paintings. But now and then a port gives up a barrel of sharp cabbage or a sack of turnips. And on those days, the line to the galley looks like pilgrims at a shrine. The cook keeps little pouches tucked near the brazier, stitched from torn shirt tails and filled with rosemary, fennel, a rind of something once called orange. Men borrow them in turn, press them to their noses while they chew. Let a different world scent their breath. A ridiculous ritual, maybe. It works. The nose tells the mind that the mouth is brave, and the mind passes the compliment to the belly. On a frozen sea, lies of this kind keep time with truth. He makes burgoo when the sea is kind oats stolen from a horse's feed aboard a prize, cooked down with beer and a scrape of treacle until it thickens to something that remembers morning. He makes peas pottage when the wind sulks, the peas breaking at last into a green that looks like the spring if you eat with your eyes first. He will even dare a stew of fish and biscuit ships scouse by a future's name when luck and courage align. Today, he scrapes brown from the pot's side and drops it back in, knowing color is flavor and story both. A quarrel almost breaks, and doesn't the hand reaches across another's bowl without thinking, drawn by the better piece of beef. The cook's ladle cracks the air once, chapter and verse. They settle. Hunger makes children of killers. Kitchen law grows them up again. A minute later, the same hand slides the same neighbor the heel of a biscuit, saved in his pocket, wrapped in a rag that smells of tar and clove. Balance is the only currency that spends at sea. Water goes into cups last. It tastes of barrel and time. the ghost of algae and oak together, but it slides warmth down the throat, and that is all anyone asks. A man with a clever streak shakes powder of burned bread into his, making coffee by another name, and grins at his own deceit. He offers the joke around the circle like a pipe. The grin is rationed in equal shares. In a corner, a few men chew on the memory of land foods as if taste could be conjured by description. One tells of a Cumbrian pie so deep you could hide a fist in it. Another swears Icelanders pound sharks into something that could strip the paint from a church door and then eat it laughing. A Breton sighs the word butter like a lover's name. Nobody mocks him. Language is a kind of eating. The cat arrives late, complaining in its small voice, and is paid its due, a laze of a stockfish, a drop of fat from the spoon's edge, the privilege of warming the cook's feet while he scrapes pans with sand. When it has finished its ration, it licks the moisture from bristled cheeks and patrols the bench line like an officer. Men extend fingers to be inspected. The animal allows affection. Its purr is the quietest drum. By the time the bowls shine with their scrub of sand and sea water, the ship's pulse has quickened. The first heat of the day is in men rather than pots. A few tuck crumbs into little leather pouches and tie them at the belt. Every crew has a famine future living in its pocket, and carrying it is not pessimism, but craft. One man leaves 3 peas on the sill for luck. Another tucks a twist of salt into a crack in the beam. They pretend not to see one another's rituals. The cook snuffs the brazier with a flat of iron and lays the coals down as if putting a child to sleep. Fire, too. Needs rest? Outside, the frost waits. The smell of boiled beef clings to their beards, a portable warmth. Hands that could murder with rope now carry spoons back to the hook like sacrament. My thanks. Someone says to the cook without looking at him, it is the closest anyone comes to saying your work keeps our names from being spoken by the sea. Later, memory will make a feast of this, the esteem like a veil, the scrape of tin, the miracle of a softened crust, the way mustard stung the nose and proved the body still answered bells other than the ship's. For now, there's only the day to meet and a thin, honest heat sitting in the belly like a coal, urging blood to the fingers. The men scatter to stations. The galley empties with the hush that follows prayer. In the pot, a last pea clings and lets go. The cook tastes it off the ladle, nods to himself at the right balance of salt and sorrow, and thus starts again. Night falls with the softness of ash, and the ship go quieter in that particular way that means the cold has lodged itself in every hinge of every bone. The wind has thinned to a knife edge, and breath smokes from mouths like tiny signals. No one says the word warmth. They say rum instead, because aboard a winter ship, the two are a kind of rhyme. A bottle appears never announced, always understood, and begins a slow circuit like a small, moving sun. The first mouthful is not flavor so much as thaw. It burns, yes, but the burn is a map back into the body tongue, throat, chest. Faces loosen a notch, backs straighten. Someone sighs without meaning to, relief pulled out of him like a splinter. The bottle passes on, and a quiet conversation starts that is really just air returning to voices. Little scraps of raids retold, half jokes bent around fatigue, place names like Spices Bergen Scarborough, Visby, La Rochelle. The stories change on each telling, not out of deceit, but out of need. The men sand the edges until the fear fits in the mouth. They are not fussy about what fills the bottle. Rum, if a Spanish or Portuguese prize has been generous, Brandewine or eau de vie, if luck brought a Flemish trader, Rhenish wine or sack that tastes like distant hills. Most often small beer drawn sharp as vinegar from a barrel older than some superstitions. Sometimes the cook warms a ladleful at the brazier and floats a clove in it, a pinch of nutmeg if the gods have played loose with a spice chest. No one asks where those cloves came from. They belong to the ship now. A man shows a trick his father taught him. Crumble a corner of ship's biscuit into the cup and drown it. Make poor man's posset. Another swears by cutting the liquor with seawater, a habit that will earn a new name in some other century. Tonight it is just prudence, less shock to the throat. More sips to go around. They call it wetting the devil, and grin at their own courage. The grin warms as well as the swallow. The bottle completes a fourth or fifth orbit, and the ripple of laughter finally breaks free. It is a tired sound, but real. Even the helmsman's mouth climbs a little at one corner, though his eyes stay on the dark ahead. A man at the rail hums a rhythm barely above the wind's low moan. Spoons tap softly on an empty keg. Not noise so much as a heartbeat made of tin. Feet answer on the frozen deck, just enough to keep blood obedient. The sound slips through the rigging, harmless as breath. And with drink, as always, comes its mirror. The line between warmth and wildfire is thumb thin. A cup is knocked against a wrist. Its splash darkens the planks and everything distills. There's a feeling, an old one, that liquid on the deck belongs to the sea once it leaves the rim. The man who spilled it kneels without being told and tips a second finger's worth over the side. A tiny libation. For the drowned, he says, "Lo." Someone answers, "For the living," and the unspoken truce resumes. No one teases. They've all seen nights when a splash felt like an omen. They sing then, if you can call it singing, not the roaring tavern anthems. Those need a room that isn't moving and a fire that laughs back. These are the low, stitched together chants that keep time a verse about a harbor light that never goes out. Another about a woman who never waits, a nonsense refrain whose only cargo is courage. The tune wanders from mouth to mouth and returns altered, as if the ship herself has added a harmony you can feel in your ribs. A man taps the beat against the haft of his knife. His hand is steady for the first time all day. 2 swallows later, the old arguments sniff at the door. Drink turns every injury into a lawyer, and winter makes eloquent plaintiffs of a small grievances. He took more beef. His watch ran light. The captain keeps bread where we keep air. Words like that can turn night to kindling, but the bottle is also a parliament when the sea has shut all others. One man's temper flares, another pushes a cup into his hand, a third says, "Save the rope for the wind." It is an ugly kind of care, but care all the same. A quarrel smolders down to a coal and is banked for morning, where it belongs. Everyone here knows fighting is a second winter. Superstition threads the hour the way tar threads a rope protective. Staining, stubborn, no whistling once the bottle comes out. Whistling calls the gale. No toasts with bare heads. The wind hears disrespect, and the wind has its own ways. A man with a St. Nicholas token rubs it between fingers before he drinks. Another kisses a splinter of bone tied at his wrist. Saint or shark? He won't say. When a blue foxfire kindles and clings to the masthead cold flame, innocent to those who have learned its name, men lift their cups and nod to it like a visiting lord. They will call it many things and agree on none. What matters is that a glow stood with them a while. Someone finds a fiddle that has suffered too much weather to carry a tune. He plucks it anyway, strings whining like gulls in winter, but his fingers remember dances from a streets that no longer exist. Two men stamp their feet to prove they still belong to their bodies. The deck answers with a creak that sounds suspiciously like approval. A boy asleep in his hammock smiles without waking. Even the cat, worldly as any sailor, flexes its paws and drapes itself around an ankle like fur made of habit. Rum sweetens the memory of everything even as it steals heat from the core. Men know this without medical language. They drink not to undo cold, but to bargain with it. I will be brave for an hour. You may have me slow tomorrow. A few pace themselves like monks. One keeps count by tying knots in a length of twine 3 knots, and the bottle moves on without him. Another pours half his share into his neighbor's tin and calls it charity, while making a different kind of calculation. Rations are politics you can taste. Once, bravado slips its leash. 2 hands reach for the bottle at once, and a fist springs to answer before a mind can. The cook's ladle arrives like a law book, rapping knuckles with the authority of a court older than kings. We eat together, we drink together, or we don't, he says. A silence like a held breath. Then a thin grin, a muttered apology, the bottle moving again. Order is an ember too small to warm everyone, too necessary to let die. Outside the lantern's pool, the dark does its old tricks. A cold halo flickers near the shrouds. A pale line skates the wave like a firefly made of salt. A man swears he hears a bell where no bell can be. Another says it's just the ship ringing in his sleep. Nobody laughs at either. Folklore is a rope you can hold when the deck is ice. A cup till us toward the black once more. 2 drops slipped to the sea with no words this time. Even men who don't pray make small offerings in weather like this. The bottle returns to the captain last and least. He wets his lips and passes it on, and the restraint earns him more than a speech would. He stands a while by the wheel, open hand on the spoke, and listens to the murmur as if gauging the ship's temperature. He will not forbid the night its medicine. He will not let it turn doctor into knife. The line is narrow. His eyes keep it drawn. Toward the end, voices flatten, vowels lengthen, and the songs fray to thread. The men drift from the circle in ones and twos, the way seabirds veer off from a wake. Business completed. One tucks a cork into the mouth of the bottle with a tenderness he has not spent on himself in weeks. Another wipes the neck with a sleeve as though cleaning a chalice. They leave a thimble of liquor in the bottom insurance against despair, or a courtesy for morning hands. No one will drink it now. What remains now belongs to sleep. It is hard to say whether the liquor has made them less cold or simply less obedient to it. Their steps fall surer, their jokes softer. The mood is not cheer so much as truce. The sea agrees not to bite hard for an hour. They agree to pretend they do not notice its teeth. The cat hops onto a barrel and purrs at nothing. Someone scratches its chin with a finger that would rather be a match. Inside the hull, the timbers give a little sigh. Everything alive aboard has exhaled at once. Tomorrow we'll charge interest on tonight's comfort heads that ring like a struck medal, mouths that taste of a stoved tar and regret. But the ledger is not the point. The point is that here, in the wide and freezing middle of nothing, a circle of men taught their bones to remember warmth. They laced their fear with a sweetness stolen from another latitude and made their hands unclench. They promised one another slyly, wordlessly, that the ship is more than wood. It is a table laid in a cold cathedral, and what goes round it keeps time like a prayer. The lantern gutter flames in the steadies. The last tin cup clicks against the rail, a small ammon. Above, the stars don't blink, they burn, patient as ever. Below, the sea carries the aftertaste of molasses and salt where it moves, as if it, too, had taken a small drink and decided to be gentle for a while. The watch changes, boots scuff, the bottle sleeps. Breath clouds and thins and fades. In the hammocks, men turn once, twice, and let go. By dawn, the rum is only a scent in the wood and a warm ghost in the chest. The bottle sleeps where someone tucked it, and the men try to do the same. Below deck, the lanterns make small suns that sway. Above, the gray light has the color of pewter. You feel the ship hush itself. Even the ropes seem to breathe more slowly. This is the hour when exhaustion finally barges past caution and claims what it is owed. Sleep aboard is not a descent. It is a ferry ride, short, shuttling, never quite reaching the far bank. Hammocks hold the men like cupped hands, each one a low cradle strung between ribs of oak. The fabric is salted stiff, and yet when the ship rolls, it moves with the body, rocking a man into that narrow lane where waking and dreaming touch. A cough starts at the astern and makes its way forward, a relay you could set your pulse by. Someone snores, someone else whispers a prayer into rough cloth, counting blessings on a knotted cord, 10 for safe water, 1 for safe sleep. What do pirates dream in the coldest seas of land? First, always land, because the mind, like a tired horse, runs for the stable it knows, streets that stay still, doors that do not slam with the wind, a table that does not list under your hand. They dream the color green, and when they wake, the memory of it hurts like bright snow. They dream bread that yields instead of breaks, and fires that warm more than smoke. They dream women, faces half remembered and made gentle by distance. They dream children they never met, voices pitched like gulls. And they dream of gold, of course, coins pouring and pouring like summer rain, only to scatter when reached for. The sea has taught even asleep to tease. There are darker dreams, too. Out here, the mind keeps a ledger of escapes, and at night it opens the book. A wave rears again and again and never falls. A line parts with the clean sound of a bone, and fingers can't find purchase. Those who have watched a man go overboard dream a small white hand just below the surface and wake swallowing air. One turns in his hammock with a strangled cry, another claws his own blanket as if the sea had learned to weave. No one laughs when it happens. You don't mock a man for the weather in his head. A superstition walks the low beams as softly as mist if, in winter, you dream of fire, the fire comes for you. The omen runs through crews from Baltic to Biscay, and men pass it along the way. They pass water constantly, with no idea where it began. Flames in sleep mean a fever in flesh, one says, or a cannon, another answers. No one claims certainty. That isn't the point. The belief is a fence around fear, a way to keep the night from roaming. When a man jerks awake, whispering smoke, the nearest hand touches his shoulder and finds his brow. If it's cool, they both breathe again. There is one who refuses to sleep below at all. He wraps himself in a length of old sail and lays under the sky where cold can cut, but air can move. Dreams drown men, he says by way of explanation, as if the sea were more merciful to waking eyes. The others call him saint or madman, depending on the hour. But no one tries to move him in the side. Each cold has its own bargain. He stares up at the rigging as if it were a set of constellations, names the lines under his breath like prayers, then dozes and starts when frost touches his lip. Before sleep, a custom one voice tells a story, not the grand saga of raids, those are for port and bright rooms. This is smaller, deliberate, the way a pilot aims toward a light, a remembered cottage smell bread and wet wool, a field where winter isn't a knife but a white quilt, or simply tomorrow's tasks, recited and made ordinary first light, chip the ice, warm the rope, mend the main topsail seam. The effect is humble and profound. The mind takes the story like a lantern and follows it down. Men sleep better when told where to go, even inside themselves. They hum, sometimes, the way a mother might while lining a cradle with the straw. A line of notes that barely rise above the ship's own voice. It threads through the hammocks, catches on the lantern hook, and comes back, altered, lower, kinder. The cat lifts its head and blinks as if agreeing that the song is in tune. In that sound, there is no bravado, no oath, no theft, only bodies trying to match the rhythm that holds them. The sea answers with its endless accompaniment, tap of drip, long groan of timber, a faraway shudder like a drum made of ice. Sleep at sea teaches a peculiar literacy. Men learn to read the hull in their bones. A change in the creak and a dozen bodies turn, a heavier slap and eyes open, not with panic, but with practice. Some swear they can measure a wave through their shoulder blades. Others can count bells without hearing them. The watch carved into muscle like a tattoo. When they do stumble ashore at last, they sway in taverns as if the earth had started lying, their legs editing the floor to fit the remembered sway. Even their dreams keep rocking for days, and the bed feels wrong because it does not move. A boy mutters into sleep and smiles. He is building a pigeon house in some hedge that never existed, or he is running a hill without falling, a miracle the sea never grants. The man next to him isn't so lucky. His breath hitches. His hand shoots up to shield his face from an invisible spray. He wakes with a sound you learned as a child to swallow and looks around, embarrassed. Someone across the row, a longshore laugh of a man with a scar like a faint rope burn across his cheek says, "It wasn't the ship, it's a kindness." That sentence. It tells him the terror belongs to a different night, a debt already paid. They sleep near a steel because asleep is permission the world seldom deserves. Cutlasses under hammocks, pistols wrapped in oiled cloth and tied to belts. So a thief will have to steal the man to steal the weapon. Even in dreams, fingers touch for the familiar crossguard the way a bishop in an icy cathedral would reach for his beads. Faith and fear are twins under a winter deck. Some wear amulets against nightmares, a coin with a hole and a thread through it, a saint's a splinter, a smooth pebble with a natural cross. One man has a chipped chess pawn from a Hans merchant's table. He rubs it until it shines like a pearl, then sleeps without stirring. Another has nothing but an old rhyme, and he whispers it until the words turn to breath. The old world walks with them into sleep, the mare that rides the chest, elves that knot hair, vessels that moan when a soul has loosened its moorings. These are not entertainments here. They are explanations you can hold. There are practicalities, too, dressed as folklore, because folklore bends men more gently than orders. No sleeping with wet feet, death starts in the toes. No unlacing to the skin wind will find your ribs like thief. If you must dream on deck, dream downwind. If the lantern sputters twice, wake the man nearest the pumps. They will tell you these are sailors' tales, good for scaring boys. Then you'll see the way the rules live in their hands. You listen, and the whole lower deck begins to sound like a farm in winter, animals in their stalls, shifting straw, snorting softly, the shed wood answering, except every animal has a knife by its bed and a map of the stars pinned to its heart. The ship holds its breath with them. Somewhere far forward, a thin drip ticks into a bucket. The lantern wick gutters and steadies. A draft, like a cat, slips along the planks, avoiding the warm spots where men are curled in pairs under one patched cloak, back to back, the old economy of heat. The strangest thing is how kindly the sea can seem when eyes are closed. Its voice is lower at night, less iron in it, more bell. Dreams borrow that tone and wash men clean for an hour. In the morning, nothing has changed. Salt meat is still iron hard, and the deck still bites. And yet the face a man makes with his mouth when he wakes is softer, as if some grit has been rinsed away. And sometimes even here the dreams turn useful. A man wakes sure he has forgotten a knot, and indeed the gasket wants retying. Another snaps upright with the taste of a smoke and finds the brazier's screen tipped an inch. The captain will never admit it, but he trusts these midnight nudges more than a fair weather promise. The sea teaches you to distrust ease and to respect what the mind whispers when pride is off duty. So they sleep as they can in slices, with weapons, with charms, with the stories for pillows. They let the ship rock them without asking where she is going. And the cold, for once, is not a knife, but a curtain that hangs quiet around the hammocks. You stand a while in the low aisle, and you can almost see it, the whole crew held in a net of breath and sound, a net the sea itself seems shy to break. For an hour, maybe two, winter waits its turn, and pirates who will be thieves again at noon are simply men afloat on the dark, dreaming of ground that doesn't move. Morning bleeds slowly into the hull, not so much light as the idea of it gray, grudging, and cold enough to sting the lungs. You follow the clatter of tin and the rasp of a ladle to the galley, a cave of damp timber where the lamps glow looks tired. Men are already there, shoulders hunched, hands cup curled around pewter plates that steam faintly. If last night's rum was a small reprieve, this is the real work of survival, chewing what the sea and time have not yet stolen. On the table lie the familiar tyrants of a long voyage, biscuits hard as bricks, salted beef slick with a sheen of fat, a pot of pale broth that smells of smoke and brine. A man wraps a biscuit with his knife hilt. It rings like crockery. Another sets his on the bench and hammers it with the heel of his hand until it fractures along old cracks like dry earth. Everyone learns the trick of holding the shard up to the lamp and tapping shake out the weevils, if there are any, pinch away the soft sawdust where larvae burrowed. Some flick the little bodies away, some shrug and eat the extra meat. Hunger edits disgust. The cook, a barrel of a man with red frozen knuckles, stirs with a wooden spoon the length of a cutlass. He hums, not a song so much as a sound to keep his jaw warm. The stew is thin, water coaxed through a memory of cow, and the salted beef must be soaked until the ocean leaves it, then boiled until it remembers it was once alive. He lifts a cube with the spoon and it jiggles dully before sliding back. Better than gnawing a spar, he says. A line he always says. Some men grin without showing teeth. You take the tin cup of broth when it comes, and the heat climbs your fingers like a blessing. The taste is blunt salt, smoke, a ghost of marrow. It is not enough, and never is. Its use is not to fill, but to persuade the body to keep trying. The biscuits soften when crumbled in, turning the soup into a gray paste that at least moves as one thing. A luckier pair steals a pinch of sugar and a drip of rum to make a porridge that smells faintly like a memory of pudding. Someone closes his eyes as he swallows, and for a heartbeat looks like a child. No fruit, no greens, only the old enemy that doesn't care about courage, scurvy. You can see it beginning at the edges of faces, gums a shade too red, old scars turning angry again, steps that argue with the knees. A man laughs and his mouth beads with blood. He wipes it without comment, used to the sea taxing him in small coin. No one knows why it happens, not truly. They only know that fresh is the cure they cannot carry, leaf, peel, something that grew from warm soil. Now and then a prize ship gives up a crate of onions or a barrel of dried berries. The men eat them with a silence that feels like prayer. To trick the tongue, some keep small cloth bags stitched with herbs, stale mint or fennel, crushed leaves from a summer no one can remember. They sniff while they eat, letting the nose lie to the mouth. A man with a bright scrap of ribbon tied at his wrist unties it and waves it near his face. The fabric is still smelling faintly of a perfumed sleeve it once belonged to. He smiles, then chews his beef with more patience. Another keeps a phial of vinegar and wipes his spoon between bites, swearing it keeps rot at bay, in the mouth and in the mind. The cook has tricks that aren't quite recipes so much as negotiations. He scorches the inside of the pot with tar scrapings to smoke the broth into tasting fuller, throws in biscuit crumbs fried in a thin sheen of oil to feign richness. When the sea is calm, he sets pebbles in a pan to heat and then slides the biscuits over them so the bottoms toast. For a minute, the galley smells like a baker's shop imagined by a starving child. On better days, he'll toss a handful of dried peas into the pot constellations of green that collapse into nothing but still convince the eye. Stories travel with the steam, tales of ports where bread comes soft from ovens and a man can bite without planning, of kitchens that roar with fire big as angels, of oranges sweet as night songs. Listening is half the meal. The other half is watching hands move in ways that mean the ship still runs passing a cup, tearing a slice, tapping a friend's shoulder, and pointing at the brightest patch of sky. Even here, etiquette survives. The youngest are served early. The sick get the deepest bowl. The man coming off watch eats without being spoken to, because his mind has not returned to his mouth yet. A quarrel sprouts at the end of the bench, as all quarrels do, sudden as a splinter and 10 times more annoying. Two men reach for the same last twist of dried fruit, a luxury from a robbed merchant's winter stores. Voices sharpen, a hand slaps the table, the cook does not look up. He bangs the ladle once on the pot, a sound like a bell, and the room remembers itself. One of the men sighs and pushes the prize across the plank. In this cold, fairness isn't a virtue, it's a tool. Old papers tell later readers that some northern crews made infusions from fir needles, a green tea that tasted like a forest and seemed to lift men back from the brink. On this ship, knowledge is scattered and superstition stands in for science. A man drops a sprig of something he swears is healing into the pot, and the cook lets it be. Whether it works is almost beside the point. Belief has calories of its own. Someone crushes biscuit to a powder and mixes it with fat, skimmed from the top of the pot, then forms it into dumplings that bob like pale islands for a minute before dissolving. Another cuts beef into dice and stirs it hard with onions saved like treasure. The smell makes 3 men weep for more than smoke. Off to the side, a boy sucks a lump of sugar as if it were a talisman carved by saints. He's kept it for 3 nights, licking it to a shine and hiding it in cloth between. And now he lets it vanish in one long blaze because morning is colder than he is brave. Salt is a tyrant and a savior both. It keeps death out of barrels and invites it into bodies. The men know this and accept it. They tip their bowls to drink every last bright slick, then run a thumb along the tin to harvest what clings. When there is nothing left, some lick the spoon and some lick the memory of it, closing their eyes to copy the taste into a place that hunger can't erase. They talk with mouths full, because winter is a thief with many hands, and you don't offer it another. When we make a port, someone says, "Never if I'll find a loaf and tear it sideways and bite, and the only salt I taste will be mine." Another answers that he wants milk so fresh it is still hums, and minhut at that, but kindly. The cat noses a tin and is given a mouthful of broth and a sliver of beef. It eats with a dignity none of them can manage. Even a small animal can be a candle. When the eating is done, the ritual continues. Sand and seawater scour the pot, hands red in the cold, the scratch of grit against iron loud as a sermon. Spoons are dried and stacked. The ladle is set where a man can find it in the dark. The cook pats the side of the pot the way a groom pats a flank habit. Affection, property, someone folds a rag and slips it in a pocket, not because it is valuable, but because you cannot trust the world to give you dry cloth twice. They rise slower than they sat, heavier, but in a way that helps. The food carries them as far as the next task. A man rubs his jaw and winces as a tooth complains. Another massages his wrists, where they ache like old doors. The crew returns to the deck with their heat banked, a glow you could almost see if you squinted, a little more color, a little less silence in the breath. Above, the sky is a slab of pewter, but the rope wears beads of water now instead of glass. The day's labor waits like weather. Behind them, the galley grows quiet again. The cook sets 3 pebbles on the stove to dry and hums his almost song. He lifts the lid and looks into the bottom of the pot as if it were a mirror. What's left? What can be made of it? How do I stretch the next? He pinches a grain of salt between thumb and forefinger and lets it fall big. Tomorrow, he says to no one, which is another way of speaking to the ship. Tomorrow will make it hot. On deck, the wind noses the sails, tentative, tasting. Men stamp their feet and flex their hands and find their places without being told. The food sits in them like a small sun. Not much, just enough to melt a corner of the morning. If treasure was once what glittered in a captain's chest, now it is the slow heat in a belly and the quiet power to bend a stiff line. The cold is still here, clever and patient, but the crew has eaten themselves another few hours of fight. In winter seas, that is a feast. By the next night, sound dies in the timbers. The wind has eased, but the cold has sharpened to a fine, bright edge. And below deck, the air carries a sour note that turns the stomach lamp oil and wet wood. But something heavier too, the breath of fever. Lanterns burn thin, their flames drawn long as needles. A cough unspools in the shadows wet, stubborn, and then another answers from farther aft, a dialogue no one wants to hear. You step down the ladder, and the warmth here feels wrong. Not comfort, but heat trapped in bodies that cannot spare it. Hammocks sway in the dim like cocoons. A man rolls and groans, one hand pressed to his ribs as though holding himself together. Another lies flat, his eyes glass bright, lips cracked and salted in white. He stares at the beams and whispers a prayer that forgets its own words halfway through. Around him, men pretend to sleep. Faces turn to the timber, listening the way you listen for leaks. Every cough maps a new fear. The ship has no surgeon, in the clean sense. It has a barber with steady hands and a pouch of worn tools. Razor, lancet, a stitch needle threaded through a scrap of beeswax. Beside him sits a box of remedies that are mostly Hope's vinegar in a stoppered bottle, dried leaves that smell of summer but now taste of dust, a lump of resin, a roll of linen saved for wounds that must be coaxed shut. He has pummeled bread crust into a poultice with warm water and rum. He has burned a sliver of brimstone in a pan to sweeten the air. He knows he is treating the ship as much as the men, and sometimes that's the same thing. He rubs a man's chest with vinegar and a pinch of mustard, the sharpness seizing the eyes of everyone nearby. It drives the rot out, someone mutters. Perhaps it does. Perhaps it only convinces the mind that fighting is possible. He lances a thumb gone black at the nail, lets bad blood leave, ties a strip of sailcloth around the wrist like promise. For frost-bitten fingers, he warms sand in a pot until it hisses and buries the hands there. Grain heat creeping into flesh with a patience fire never learned. When fever climbs too high, He wraps the head with rags dipped in snowmelt, whispers to the heat like a horse. Easy, easy. A bucket waits near the bulkhead, half full of gray water and something darker. A rat skitters along the beam, sure-footed as a sailor, eyes reflecting the lantern in two pinpricks of red. No one chases it. Rats are both plague and warning. They find leak sour wood before any man's nose and draw circles around barrels whose seams have gone from tired to dangerous. A boy watches the animal pass with the look of someone sighting a familiar star. News moves here without voices. Men learn the weight of a shipmate's breathing, the rhythm of rattling in the ribs, the pause before a next breath returns too long, too long. Here he comes. All right. They share their rum with the worst of it, just enough to loosen clenched shoulders, to let the cough fall out. They tuck an extra scrap of blanket under a neck. No one says kindness. It would sound like boasting. Instead, they carry the sick toward warmth and do not notice they are lifting their own fear with him. Scurvy earns its shadow long before its name. Gums throb and bleed. Scars reopen as if the past itself has been unstitched. A man stands and the world tilts. He sits and his heart stumbles like a step on loose plank. In better years, someone might have traded for a clutch of onions or a lemon fenced from a dockside stall, the kind of luck that can rewrite a voyage. But out here, there is only what the ship already knows. Men chew spruce tips when they can steal a branch from a cold coast, boil a handful of nettle they found snagged in a net weeks back. Whether it heals or only tells the mind a brave story is not a question they can afford. They try smoke and sour to clean the air, hanging rags soaked in vinegar from the beams, setting a pan of tar scrapings to smolder until the hold smells like a burned rope walk. The barber, who knows more of hair than humors, keeps tally with the notches cut into a rib. Not for the dead, but for the days a fever bends without breaking. The men pretend not to see the marks. Counting is useful on deck. Down here, it can gut you. Whispers trace shadows, 3 lost in as many nights. Canvas sewn with the last length of sailmaker's twine. A shot tied at the feet, the prayer spoken as fast as wind. The sea takes quietly in the cold. You can almost believe it is only sleep that deepens. When the dead go over, the water closes without a scar. Men look away out of a courtesy you'd use at a door you won't enter. If there are coins for eyes, they are copper from a split button, not silver. The true wealth is needle and cloth saved for the living. Quarantine is a word from courts, not decks. But practice grows anyway. The coffers are pushed aft, near the asperse spars and the slow drip from the seams, where the air moves least. A blanket hangs from a beam to make a wall. It is not medicine. It is courtesy to fear. Still, now and then, an arm sneaks under the cloth with a cup in it, and a voice says, "Drink," and another says, "Ah, go on," and something like human brightness returns for a swallow. You move past a hammock where a boy 15 at most sleeps with his knees to his chest, jaw tight with stubbornness or pain. He is the kind kept for climbing and running and fitting into places grown men cannot go. On deck, they have a dozen jokes for him. Down here, he has a name, plain and used, and someone has tucked his scarf under his cheek so the rough cloth won't scrape his face when fever shakes him. This scarf was once bright. Now it holds only a memory of color. It is enough. The barber opens a little jar. Inside, brown syrup rolls like slow thunder. Treacle, someone says, a word that means everything from antidote to lie. It tastes of spice and hope and old markets. He gives a finger's worth to a man whose eyes have sunk so far they look like harbor lights at low tide. The patient swallows and blinks as if he's seen a trick. Sometimes the trick works. Often it simply grants a good hour. Silence changes down here. In fair weather, the hall speaks in ordinary sentences. Creak, sigh, thrum a language sailors forget their understanding. When the sick room grows, the ship's voice thins. The timbers groan smooths to a hush, as if the wood itself is listening for the next breath. Men stop telling lies about taverns and start telling true stories about bread and shade and the particular sound of hens fussing in a yard. They hang on to those sounds like lines in a squall. There are decisions no one wants. When a wound smells sweet and the skin around it turns the color of milk, they heat an iron until it glows and bite down on leather. Cautery saves and it ruins, and sometimes it does both. Afterward, the barber's hands tremble where no one can see. The cat finds his lap and kneads at his coat as though dough could be made of cloth. He breathes easier with the weight. Above, the pump clacks, unpausable, and its cadence becomes a metronome for the hold. Men time their dozing to that hollow beat. Each suck a proof the ship is doing her half of the bargain. A draft slips down through the hatch and lifts the lantern flame. The light sketches ribs on faces. You could study them like a map and know where each man keeps his quiet grief. It is not all unraveling. Now and again, the fever breaks, sweat comes like rain after a hard season. Eyes clear, the voice returns. The man who was counting the breaths of others adds his own to the total, and for a while the hold smells almost clean, like cold iron and bread 2 houses away. Someone tells a joke too ribald to repeat, and a laugh spills weak, but clean until coughing grabs it by the throat and shakes it quiet. Even that feels like a step toward life. Fish, the boatswain says the next day, and throws up a handful of small silver fillets from a net scraped along a floe. The cook rubs them with salt and sets them beside the stones he heated on the galley's small plate. The flesh sizzles and hisses, and for a minute the hold smells like a harbor at dusk. The sick eat first. It is only mouthfuls, but men sit straighter afterward, as though the spines can run on memory. The barber doesn't smile exactly, but the line between his eyes eases, and he slips a piece to the cat, who accepts it as if he had ordered it. Night returns, as it always does. The lanterns gutter low, husbanded like coin. The barber rewinds his bandages and slides his tools back into their slots. The pouch is leather soft with years. He wipes his hands with a rag soaked in vinegar until the skin burns and it smells of pickled smoke. He makes a notch on the rib, another day lived through, and touches the mark with one finger. The way you touch a relic when you have no church. You cannot say a ship believes in anything, but you can say that men on it do. And sometimes the hull learns the habit. The quiet that follows isn't empty. It holds breathing. And under that, the pump. And under that, the small stir of the sea against the planks, the old world tapping to say, still here. The sick shift and settle. Someone dreams. And the dream is ordinary, a door that sticks, then yields, a bowl of stew too hot to swallow, a hand on a shoulder that means stay. You stand there long enough to feel your own breath lengthen to match the ship's, and then you climb back to the deck where the cold is honest and the stars look like clean nails struck into a dark plank. The wind tastes like metal and distant pine. Somewhere ahead, a day waits that will be less cruel than this one. Down below, the lanterns blink and do not go out. The sea wakes like a wounded animal, no warning, only a shudder that runs from keel to crown and sets every spar to groaning. Wind knives in from the dark, and the canvas answers with a crack that sounds like bone. You lunge for the nearest line, the rope iron hard under your fingers, and in that instant, the long winter hush is gone. In its place, command, confusion, prayer. Hold fast, someone roars, and the order spreads the way fire does when tinder is dry. Sail comes down by violence, not grace. The men reef as if arguing with the sky, hands raw in a heartbeat, knuckles blooming red where the salt has split them before. A watchman's voice thins to a reed in the gale weather coming round. The captain is already at the wheel, coat clapping his legs, eyes dragging the horizon for the line where wave becomes wall. There's no line. It is all wall now, a rising black that erases stars and then gives them back in broken pieces. The ship takes it on the quarter and shudders like a struck bell. Storm drill is older than piracy. Topsails close reefed, braces hauled until the blocks speak. Anything loose lashed twice, then lashed again, because fear makes a better knot than pride. They rig preventers on the yards, send a pair to double lash the tiller ropes, heave the boats farther inboard, and set oilskins if a man owns such a luxury over wool already wet through. One graybeard spits in his palms, rubs whale grease onto his fingers, and grunts, else they'll crack off. Nobody laughs. This is not bravado. It is chemistry learned the hard way. The first sea lifts them as if to show them the world and then puts them down wrong. Barrels break their moorings and cannon, already chalked for weather, thump in their beds as if remembering older songs. Someone swears he hears the keel talk. You can too. If you listen, the low, complaining a string of wood that has been asked to be both bridge and fish, heave to. The captain snaps, and the ship obeys grudgingly, nose angled to bite at the oncoming ranks instead of letting them hammer her broadside. The canvas shortens to angry fists. The bow throws white fire. Rain becomes sleet, becomes needles. You taste iron. A man in the foretops slips. The squeal that leaves his mouth is a child's sound, thin and small. And then three hands are on him, dragging him back into the net of lines where the ship keeps her frightened. No scolding, just breath and the quiet slap of a good rope across his shoulders to wake the courage. Below, a hatch slams and is barred. Deadlights go in over the stern windows to keep the sea from peering into other men's dreams. Lightning unbuttons the sky. In that flash, you see things you will not confess, the wave behind the wave, the one that argues with faith, the one that makes even old mouths whisper apologies to mothers. Thunder rolls late like a judge delivering a sentence no one will write down. Lash him there. The mate growls, pointing at a man who will not stay upright. If he sleeps, He sleeps tied. It isn't cruelty, it's arithmetic. One body overboard drags three trying to save him. Nobody can spare that math. Ropes sing, blocks a shriek. The mainmast leans as if to speak into the wind's ear, then thinks better of it and holds. The sea climbs the deck from larboard to starboard and back again, hunting for any unlashed story to end. The cook, who has always moved like gravity, belongs to him, crawls the way men do in churches, and wedges a sand-filled kettle where it can't take someone's head. He does not pray out loud, but his lips move. He has lost 3 pans today. He will not lose a man because of one. They're old tricks for bad water. A bag of oil pricked and trailed astern to lay a skin over the breaking crests. A storm forecourse left enough to bite so the ship keeps her nerve. The helm luffed, then eased, luffed, then eased, not to fight the wind, but to negotiate with it. The captain has seen a dozen gales and lived to grow careful. He will not scud before this one. The lee looks like a mouth full of teeth. Keep her to it, he says, and feels the wheel kick like a horse with better sense than its rider. You brace your feet on the gratings and learn the new floor, which is now a wall, then a hill, then a trick. A boy vomits bile and then keeps hauling. There is no shame left in him, only compliance. The cat, a ridiculous fact in spray and thunder, appears at the forecastle hatch, considers the sky, and withdraws with contempt. The men laugh because they need to. It is laughter like a match in wind brief, hot and gone. She knows, someone says, we live. Superstition is not for later. It is for now. A cry from below. She's taking it in. The pump crews go on the instant. Handspikes bite into palms and the old rhythm starts, suck, clatter, heave, spill like the ship's second heart returning. Tarred oakum was pounded into seams at Michaelmas. Tar was warm then. Winter has different opinions. Water comes in where wood privately argues with itself. A sailcloth is readied for foddering a patch on the outside trick, hauled under the hull to stanch a wound too wide to stitch from within. The idea shames no one. Doctors do the same with a skin. The storm's voice changes at about the hour no one can name, not louder, lower, as if it has found fundamentals and means to play them. The men find their own work without waste. No shouting that isn't a sentence, no motion that is not a verb. A jar of sand appears from somewhere and is thrown on the deck to give boots bite. A boy's fingers won't close. A man cups them in his own and breathes until the purple sugar out of them. Arguments that have simmered through weeks of cold lose all heat. The enemy is outside. That makes friends of thieves. The helmsman's eyes shine like a stone's in rain. He is not heroic. He is occupied. The captain thinks not of loot nor of codes, and then moves 2 men 6 paces. 1 line, 1 cleat. The geometry of survival is sometimes that small. He hears the mast, puts his hand to it, and murmurs a thing to wood that is not in any prayer book. The mast answers by not breaking. This is consent. Hold for the next 3. The mate calls, having decided there will be 3, and the sea, to everyone's astonishment, agrees. They come the first like a memory, the second like punishment, the third like a promise to stop. Each time the ship climbs wrong and corrects, drops uglier than a fall and writes by a stubbornness alone. Bones catalog the sequence. Sinew takes notes. A man begins to laugh too high, the sound of a kettle boiling dry, and a hand lays on his shoulder. Not yet, says the hand, and the kettle quiets. Hours bend. Time becomes measure by rope burned through a glove, or by the way a bell refuses to ring because no hand is stupid enough to try. When at last thunder grows distant, the men do not notice first. The cat does, stalking out to look unimpressed at the sky's retreat. The wind remembers it has better things to do and wanders away to bully some other fool. The rain degrades to cold water and then to nothing. Sound returns in familiar clothes, the slap of a loose line against a rat line. A man's teeth chattering with the honesty of it. A chuckle at nothing, simply because nothing is so welcome. They stand where they are and sway like barley after a gust. No one cheers. The cheer will come later, in a harbor that looks better than it is, in a bed that feels unsteady for 3 nights. For now, they move through the catalog count heads, count fingers, count leaks, set hands to the pump again because mercy is never complete. Walk the deck for sprung seams. Find the barrel that got loose and call it names. Put a blanket over a man who didn't know he wanted one. The captain stays at the wheel until it is insulting to do so, then yields it as if handing over a child. His legs argue for a moment and then forgive him. Down below, dead lights come off the stern windows. Someone rubs a circle in glass and looks out at the chopped, dark gift of survival. The galley coughs to life, no flame they can't trust. Just a pot cradled over coals like a secret. The smell of something hot moves through men the way a touch does. Salt beef, worse than shoe leather an hour ago, is now an edible joke. Hands cradle tin cups as if drinking light. To the ones who held, somebody says, too softly to be a toast. No one answers, but everyone hears. A ship learns her crew in weather. She knows now who sings at the first a slap of spray and who prays when the barrels roll, who steadies another man without asking for thanks, who lies to himself and then learns better. She has learned this lot are a stubborn. She will repay them in her way by floating one more day. Above, the last shreds of a storm walk the horizon like soldiers too tired to march in a step. The starboard shrouds drip. The mainsail hangs like a licked wound, ugly, clean, alive. You put your palm to the rail. It is cold, but it is not killing. The ship breathes. And for the first time since the sky went wrong, so do you. Morning is a lie of light gray, spare, and thin as old paper. After the rage, a hush, not peace, but the kind of quiet a battlefield keeps when the smoke sits down and refuses to leave. The sea has flattened into something that isn't water anymore. The surface looks like hammered metal glazed in milk. When the bow noses forward, there is resistance, a slow, stubborn push, and a grinding underfoot that feels like a complaint from the earth. The men look over the rail and see the truth ice everywhere, in plates and escabs, drifting, catching, knitting. The wind has forgotten its job. Sails hang slack and crusted white, edges feathered into lace by the cold. Lines glitter with beads that bite fingers. You listen, and the ship is different. Her usual creaks muted, her voice lowered, as if the very air has thickened and eats sound. The cat steps onto the deck, tests a paw, and shakes it with offense. You shared the sentiment, cold once cut. Now it presses, weighty and patient, a creditor who knows you have nothing left to sell. Work continues because that is the pact. Men take ice poles, oars, spars, anything long with a stubborn soul, and lean from the rail to shove floes aside. The pieces answer with bell-like knocks against the hull, the music of a winter harbor without the safety. Frost grows on beards like a second mouth. When someone laughs, it breaks away in white crumbs. Breath shows and hangs, small ghosts that cannot decide where to go. A boy rubs his hands and swears he can hear his blood move. An older hand says, "Good means it still does." Below, the pump's cadence slackens and settles. Less water now, the fathered patch holds. A man kisses his blackened thumbnail and touches the mast in thanks to the patch, to the tree, to the luck. No one asks. They set an iron pot on a brazier, shielded like a sickly king. Heated stones pass hand to hand, wrapped in rag, each a kindness. The cook pretends his thin stew is medicine. It is, because someone says so and enough men agree. A pinch of ground mustard appears from nowhere. It turns the broth honest. Everyone coughs, smiles, and for a minute they believe in alchemy. The captain has the look of a man listening to something below speech. He tries a trickle of canvas and hears it complain. No help there. We drift on God, someone mutters, and another answers. We always did. The helmsman keeps the wheel for the courtesy of it. Momentum, however small, needs a companion. This is what seamanship looks like when heroics would be a stupid little adjustments, tiny obediences to physics, patience that feels like hunger. Treasure such as it is comes out of hiding because a chest blocks a path a man needs now. The lid lifts, silver cups glare back, coin stares with blind eyes. No one reaches. In weather like this, gold is a joke with a bad punchline. The chest closes again with a thud that sounds embarrassed. Later, somebody will claim they would have thrown it all to the sea for a spoonful of heat. In truth, they do not need to. The sea has already taken its tax in blood and sleep, and something like arrogance. The ice closes, loosens, closes. It is not a trap you can see tightening. It is patience testing your answers. The men answer with chores. Ropes get greased with tallow stolen from a cask meant for lamps. A glove is cut to make two fingerless ones. The donor swears and then grins because his hands can feel the wheel again. A charm bone polished by thumb changes owners. A transfer of faith as neat as any ledger entry. On another day, there would be a joke about saints and thieves. No one minds the silence. It conserves heat. Sound carries strangely. A whisper at the bow can be heard at the astern. A cough sounds like a knock on a door you don't remember closing. Above, a gull wheels and the beat of its wings arrives seconds late, as if sound itself has to slog through ice. One man whistles 3 notes, sailors always think wake wind, and others, without meeting eyes, join soft as breath. The tune travels around the deck like a string tied through them. You feel ridiculous and relieved. The wind remains unmoved, but the men are different for having believed. There's an old trick from northern coasters, oil poured gently onto the water to calm a breaking edge, to keep ice from biting at the hull. A leather pouch is pricked with a pin and trailed. Superstition, some would say. Physics. Others argue oil changes the way surface tension breaks. Out here, The argument doesn't matter. Results do. And today, the line of oil draws a brief satin road between shards. The captain nods once. Pocket alchemy again? A rumor glides through the crew like a seal under black water. A man below is worse. Fever, the kind that sweats in cold. Vinegar cloths are laid on his temples because vinegar is sharp and smells like control. The boy with the counting habit sits near the hammock and counts creaks. Numbers, he believes, can pin a ship to sense. The sick man's eyes flutter toward a dream of land and then away. Someone drips hot broth between his cracked lips, murmuring a harbor story in a voice that pretends this is a tavern corner and not a wooden belly riding on silence. Midday arrives without brightness. The sun is a pale coin you cannot spend. A floe grinds along the starboard beam with a long, patient moan, the sort of sound that makes teeth ache. Men flinch. The captain walks the length of the deck, lays his palm on the place the sound most lives, and listens as if feeling for a pulse. She doesn't like it, he says. We'll ease her, so weight is shifted. Small and deliberate a barrel here, a coil there, a human body or two sent to stand where they can act like ballast with breath. The ship relaxes by a degree only sailors would notice. That is seamanship, too. Someone fishes a coin from a pocket thin and worn and not worth its own story and flips it into the ice. It skitters, rings, disappears between plates. No one laughs. Every crew has a way to buy permission. If the sea bargains, it bargains on terms men mumble more than agree. Another man taps the mast twice and whispers a name not for public use. The cat blinks a slow, approving nothing, condemning less. The world shrinks to materials and meanings. Tar is not just tar, it is proof you can put into a seam. Wool is not just wool, it is a pocket that hoards heat and patience. The smell of smoke from the brazier tastes like news. Men lean toward it the way plants do. One snips the burnt end of a rope and pockets it as if to carry the comfort. Later, he will tell someone it's for luck. He is not lying. Afternoon performs its slow work. Ice loosens a thumb's worth. A lane opens where there was white. The ship answers with a sigh so light you'd call it imagination if 30 men hadn't heard it together. The helmsman clears his throat and the wheel speaks back faintly. I, he says to Wood, as if the two of them have been arguing and just found a place to meet. A sail is shaken out just enough to show goodwill. It takes the smallest breath and wears it like a favor. Below, men sleep in twos, back to back, as if the human spine were designed to be a stove. The cat selects a shoulder, kneads a sermon into it, and purrs the way bees sound in summer ridiculous that such music exists here, and yet here it is. Someone dreams in color for the first time in weeks. Bread, not a stone. Grass, not rope. A woman's laugh that doesn't cut. He wakes, admits none of it, and rubs frost from his beard with the gentleness of a man afraid to scare a bird. Evening thinks about happening. Light thins until the world is the inside of a pewter cup. The ice is still there, but it is not the same ice. It moves with grudging courtesy. The captain lifts his chin and smells the difference salt that is not asleep. He does not order songs or speeches. He says only, stand ready. It sounds ceremonial, and perhaps it is. Readiness is the only rite that never betrays its congregants. There is a last test. A plate takes the bow and clings like an accusation. The ship stalls, the deck falls unkindly level. Men are already there, poles down, shoulders low, legs braced. A grunt that climbs from belly to mouth, and the plate slips away, muttering. The ship goes forward half a yard and then another. No one cheers. A man wipes his eyes as if sleet had returned. It has not. Another touches the cat and earns a scratch. He grins as if blessed. Night will make everything uncertain again. Stars will come like witnesses. Cold will sit beside every man and ask hard, quiet questions. But there's motion now, microscopic and magnificent. The ship moves, and because she moves, men can afford to plan a better patch on the forehatch in the morning. A few lines of a stitch in a torn mitten, a spoon of grease for the pump handle, so it does not shriek at night and wake sorrow that needs its rest. If they are lucky, and they have been unlucky long enough to hope fairly, the wind will learn their names again tomorrow. If not, they will push. It is what they do. You put your palm to the rail. The wood is still cold, but in it there is a thread of warmth from hands that refuse to go numb. Somewhere under ice, water thinks of being water again. You can feel it in the faintest lift. That is enough to carry a night. Dawn does not so much arrive as remember itself. A thin seam of pale color opens on the rim of the world and leaks across the ice until the ship, the ropes, the beards, the very breath of the men glow the way pewter warms in a smith's hand. Nothing cracks with drama. Things loosen. The floes that argued all night with the bow begin to drift apart as if they have been called to other duties. In the new light, you can see a softness in the surface, a slick of melt blooming along edges like sweat at a collar. Somewhere underfoot, the ship gives a satisfied private sigh. Men stir without being told. After storms and ice, orders become unnecessary grammar. Everyone knows the sentence. Poles come up, shoulders go down, knees set, and with each steady heave, the lane ahead widens from knife slit to ribbon. The cook, whose kingdom is a brazier and a dented pot, risks a little more fuel. A thread of steam rises, and the smell is almost sacrament-thin oat. A grating of nutmeg a pilgrim swore was lucky and has carried in a twist of cloth since summer. Tar smoke that says hearth even when it is not. Tin cups pass from hand to hand. Lips crack, smiles crackle, too. The captain spends his words the way a miser spends coin, 2, 3, and each lands where it must. Stand to, ease there. Good. He rubs his thumb across the wheel's rim, finding familiar nicks like rosary beads. He has named each one in bad weather and does not care to admit it. He lifts his chin, tasting the air. There's salt today, not the flat varnish of ice, but the quick, clean sting of moving water. She'll take a cloth, he says, and the mate nods as if he thought of it first. A hand climbs to the main, shakes the canvas, and frost falls in shivers of glass. The sail belly takes a small breath, no boast, only intent. Below, the sick man's fever breaks the way ice does quietly, beginning at edges. Someone has kept a thumbprint of ember alive in a pan of sand all night, a superstition made practical, and the heat of it has been worth more than coin. Vinegar rags hang over a beam like flags at half-mast. When he wakes, he asks for water, and calls the ship by her name instead of she. The boy who counts creaks forgets to count for 5 whole minutes and only remembers when the silence spooks him. He smiles at the absurdity and then counts the smile, too. Up top, they mend. A mitten becomes 2 with a slit and a course a stitch. A seam along the lee rail gets fresh oakum tamped into it, with a marlin spike warmed in the brazier until the tar runs eager. Whale grease goes on stays, not because anybody likes the reek, but because the lines stop complaining when they're fed. A seizing on the mizzen is found sulking and reshaped with the persuasion of a mallet. This is the liturgy of relief small repairs, done without a swagger, each a stitch in the fabric that had threatened to tear. Someone produces a crust of sugar saved from a plundered chest. The lump has been rattling in a pocket through weather that should have taught it humility and crushes it in his palm. He sprinkles it into the cook's pot, and the sweetness makes men close their eyes when they swallow. They do not speak of gratitude. They prove it by standing up again. One man tucks the last brown grains into a twist of rag for a child he claims he will visit one day. No one asks him whose. The cat has decided the thaw belongs to her. She walks the rail as if she rode it, tail high, glancing down at the slow-breaking lanes and offering judgment appropriate to a queen. When a floe kisses the hull with an apologetic tap, she flicks an ear as though the world has finally learned manners. A youth whistles a tavern tune under his breath, and the cat pretends not to hear while angling her head to the exact tilt that best receives music. A breeze, barely enough to stir a candle flame, arrives from the south like a decision made far away on your behalf. The canvas tests it, swells the smallest possible amount, and then shrugs, as if to say, yes, we will. The helmsman finds his old rhythm, the lazy little nudge, the warning in finger bones when a floe thinks itself important, the way a ship will answer if you ask and sulk if you order. He smiles a winter skinny smile. There, he says, to wood and water alike, and there is where she goes. In the slow work of moving forward, tongues loosen, the stories are not loud, loudness wastes heat, but they become frequent, tiny sparks along a cold wick. A man tells of a church in a harbor town where the ceiling is painted with ships sailing upside down to prove heaven knows our kind. Another swears his grandmother taught him to put a knife under his pillow to cut bad dreams, and he laughs that it never worked at sea, because dreams here have no respect for knives. The boy confesses he hums to count. An old hand confesses he never learned his letters, but can spell wind with the hairs on his wrist. There is no shame here. The sea has already charged every account. The interest left is kindness. Mid-morning, a crack runs through the ice to starboard with a sound like cloth tearing, and then like the word yes. Water, honest and black, shows its face, and the bow leans toward it with a hunger that is not metaphor. Give her a hand. The mate calls, and poles bite, shoulders heave. The sail takes a breath you can see. The hull passes between white edges that pretend to be teeth and are, this time, only lips. Men exhale together. No one needed the order, still. It feels good to obey something that smiles. They pass, too, a floe that is stolen in the night. What every ship knows, it must lose a bucket, a broken spar, the lid of a chest, A man reaches with his pole and hooks the lid back aboard. The hinge squeals like a pig, and somebody laughs because a pig would have been a feast. The lid has a carving on it, a crude rose, 6 petals done by a hand who loved someone once. The man who rescued it adds a 7th petal with his knife, then tacks the lid above the galley door as if to give the ship a new coat of arms. It looks like hope that learned to whittle. By noon, the world has edges again. The horizon separates from the sky like lips that have thawed. A gull writes its name on the air, another follows. Sailors will swear birds mean land even when the birds mean only fish. But belief is a kind of warmth, and today belief gets to keep its coat on. South, says the captain, and the word lands like bread. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to. Discipline returns in kinder clothes. Watches resume their sensible split. The bell's voice is thin but proud. A token passes in the palm at each change a button, a bead of blue glass to remind the next man that he belongs to a chain. When it lands in your hand, it carries the weight of other fingers. You squeeze it once and tie it on without looking. Every crew invents an oath they can afford. This one is a bead, shared, simple, stubborn. Below, men scrape a salt from beef with the patience of scholars removing grime from a manuscript. One shaves off a sliver of dried apple the way the careful shave gold, so thin it's more idea than flesh, and drops it into the pot. No one asks where he found it. Gifts announce their own right to exist. Hammocks are rehung with an inch more care and an inch more slack. To swing with the ship's kinder movement, 2 men sleep back to back with their boots off for the first time in weeks. It feels obscene. It feels like church. The cat judges them and then curls at their hips like a benediction. On deck, a man mends a rent in a sail with stitches so neat you would swear he was sewing skin. Across from him, another scours rust from a pistol that saved no one from ice and will make no one warm. He knows this. He does it anyway because hands want tasks that end. A third scrapes frost from the compass glass with a thumb and sees the needle quiver toward south like a dog that recognizes a lane home. He puts his hat back on with ceremony he'd deny. The afternoon is a lesson in incremental gifts. The wind never rises above polite, but it persists. The ice keeps stepping away. The pump does not need singing to keep time. When a line snaps because something always does, it is only a brace on a block, and 3 hands fix it without inventing new swears. The captain walks his ship, touching here, nodding there, removing a sliver from a man's palm with the pin heated in the brazier and saying, "You'll live as if he were a doctor," which in winter he is. Toward evening, real evening, with color, the sun discovers pigments it had forgotten inside itself. Pale gold stains the sea's wrinkles. Pink rinses the ice until even broken plates look celebratory. The men watch without pretending it is ordinary. A few make the sign of the cross, and a few pretend to, and a few do nothing at all but stand with their mouths soft. Someone's voice starts a song with a chorus made for work. It is not about God or kings. It is about a house with the smoke in the roofline and a door that sticks when it rains. Others come in on the second line, not to make beauty, but to make proof. The ship hums in the right key. When the light drains, the cold returns, not the tyrant of last week, but the strict uncle who reminds you to mind your tools. Lanterns swing, trimmed lower now because oil is law. Below, the ember in the sand pan is banked like a baby, and the cook covers it with his hand as if blessing a forehead. Men who have not slept in truth sleep. Those on watch lean against the truth. They can trust a deck that moves, a wheel that answers, a sky that is crowded again with navigation instead of threat. Before you go below, you lay your palm on the rail. It is still winter cold, but under the skin there is a thread of heat where too many hands have asked it to live. Somewhere aft, the captain writes 3 lines in his book Wind S by E. Ice diminishing. Crew, he pauses, considers pride, writes steady. He closes the book with a thumb between pages, as if he cannot quite bear to end the sentence. Neither can you. Not yet. Night brings back the ship's oldest lullaby, wood answering water, water answering moon. The cat patrols and then permits herself to sleep where the compass lives, a small god over a smaller god. You listen to the hush between creaks and find a new sound there, a faint, regular clap as the sail kisses its mast. It is a tiny applause for continuing. Tomorrow there will be work and worry and the same old bargains. Tonight there is motion south, and that single fact loosens knots even rope cannot see. Night loosens its grip like a tired fist. The last of the mist unthreads itself, and morning climbs the rigging in pale ribbons. You wake to the sound a ship makes only when she has forgiven you a quiet, satisfied rush along her flanks, the small applause of canvas taking a modest wind. The cold is still here, but it's a courteous guest, now present, watchful, no longer hungry. A gull carves a white mark across the sky and vanishes toward a line you can finally name again, horizon. Work begins without a speech. It is the old choreography, but gentler. Men move in pairs out of habit and gratitude, shoulders brushing like punctuation in a language they never learned to write. The captain stands by the wheel with the air of a man who has slept the shortest good sleep of his life. He turns his head as if to listen, not to the crew, not to the wind, but to the ship herself. South and a little by east, he says, low, and the order takes the shape of a path. Below deck, hammocks carry the weight of men who no longer dream of drowning. The sick one wakes with a salt line dried at his temples and asks for bread instead of a prayer. The boy who counted the night into pieces uncurls from his station and forgets to whisper numbers for a blissful hour. Someone shakes the ember back to life in its pan, feeds it a splinter and a promise. Heat moves through the room like a rumor that turns out to be true. The cat returns to her rounds, a gray shadow at ankle height, tail sketched into a question mark that never needs an answer. She inspects the galley, blinks at the captain's door, chooses the coil of line nearest the sun, and becomes a small, purring monument to survival. A man taps his breastbone 2 fingers, quick, private, when she passes, not because he believes in cats as saints, but because the sea has taught him to thank any god that keeps its appointments. On deck, the men unbutton their coats by a single notch, a concession to civility. One produces a sliver of soap hoarded since autumn and hands it round with ceremony. Each man scrubs a patch of wrist, a knuckle, the ridge of a jaw, the vulnerable lane behind an ear. The smell is faint tallow and remembered lavender, but it opens a door in the brain that leads somewhere warm. A laugh goes up when the soap inevitably slips and skitters across the deck. The cat considers chasing it, decides against work. You notice how the ship has been repaired by hands that know her like kin. A new wedge shows pale in the caprail. A lashing lies with the clean angles of a sailor who can tie a knot in his sleep. Oil darkens a stay. Oakum blurs the seam's harsh line into something like mercy. The men don't boast about any of it. They carry their competence like a talisman they would never sell. The sea changes color by degrees. Steel considers pewter, then attempts a bruise of blue. The wind peers around the bow and decides you have earned its company. Canvas swells, then smooths full belly, long breath. The helmsman's hands loosen on the wheel the way the jaw unsets after a verdict. She holds, he says, not loudly, and the words settle into the wood. A story begins near the mainmast, another by the forward hatch. They are not the kind that grow antlers and crowns in the telling. Winter has filed the appetite for extravagance down to what fits in a hand. A man remembers a tavern where the fire lived like a dog between boots. Another swears he'll spend his first coin in port on pears of all things ripe enough to soften at the neck, and he mimes the tilt of the bite, the drip down the thumb. Someone promises to burn the lice out of his shirt and never speak of them again. The promises are small on purpose. Small things can be kept. When the sun climbs a palm's breadth, a change passes through the crew like a shadow of wings. The bell speaks, watches trade places. A blue glass bead moves from one wrist to another, and stays a heartbeat longer between them than it did last week. It has weight now of sleep taken, of souls counted and still here. Mind it, the off-going man says. I, says the other, and the thread between them tightens, invisible, unbreakable for the day. At the galley door, bowls receive their portion biscuit softened into a porridge that pretends at generosity, a sliver of beef that no longer fights the tooth, a spoon of something sweet because a man pressed crumbs of sugar flat in his palm and refused to hoard joy when he could share it. They eat with the reverence of monks who know the cost of bread. The cook wipes the rim of the pot with a cloth and hangs it careful as a relic. The captain opens his ledger not for sums, but for witness. He writes sparingly, each letter propped against the other like men on a cold bench, ice abating. Crew mended, God willing southing. The locket at his elbow catches a shard of sun. He does not look at it. He does not need to. He closes the book with one finger inside as if to remind the future that today is still being written. Afternoon brings color back to the world in places you'd forgotten it could live. The bruise pink inside a wind-chapped ear. The rust-red smile a rope leaves around a belaying pin. The improbable spring green of a patch sewn long ago from someone's stolen skirt. There is laughter that wears no armor. When a line snaps, the cry that answers it is brisk rather than panicked. 3 hands steady, 2 hands a splice. 1 hand pats the repaired place as if to say, "We see you." A lone bird chooses your masthead as a sermon. It drops and rises, skims the lip of a swell, turns its head to show an eye bright as a bead. Sign enough. Someone says, land may be days off, but the bird can be a promise that has learned to fly. The man with the pears in his mouth hums something to the bird under his breath. Maybe thanks, maybe a bargain. By late day, the wind has the good manners to be steady. The ship carries herself like a woman who knows her own face. The sea lays down a narrow, silver road for the bow to follow. It isn't magic. It's physics wearing its Sunday best. Even so, a man at the rail slips a coin from a pocket and weighs it in his palm. He doesn't throw it. He doesn't need to. The superstition has already done the work. It has given him a choice. He puts the coin back and chooses to save it for pears. Evening gathers, slow and generous. The sky finds its blues. The water answers with its own. Shadows bloom in honest places, the lee of a coil, the cup of a hand, the angle of a jaw softened by fatigue that does not wound. Someone starts a work song, and this time it's not to haul or heave, it's to keep the hour from closing too quickly. The voices are cracked. The pitch is approximate, and it is beautiful because of those things. When the chorus asks for an answer, the sea provides one a hiss against the hull. Perfectly in time, lanterns swing out. Their light is not luxury, it's proof. It paints every rope with a line of gold, draws a thin saint's halo around the cat's ear, puts deep amber into the knuckles of the man at the helm. Below, the hammocks take their share of weight. The ember, banked and breathing, throws a small heart onto the planks. It will not warm the room. It will warm a memory you'll need later when winter tries your name again. You stand by the rail the way you did on the worst night, and you lay the same palm in the same place. The wood has learned nothing and everything since then. It is just wood. It is also the body that carried 50 hearts across a thought of death. Frost crystals, the last stubborn ones, web the iron nail heads. Your breath smokes and lifts and vanishes, and the vanishing feels like a kind of benediction. The captain speaks to the man on the middle watch. Call me for any change, he says, which is to say, I will not pretend sleep is stronger than duty. The man nods. It is a simple contract, and it has saved more lives than any law. The cat leaps to the binnacle and sits sphinx still above the compass. The needle forgets its trembling and settles toward south as if soothed. The stories say cats command wind. You know better. Or perhaps you don't. It doesn't matter. The wind answers anyway. When the stars come, they arrive all at once, as if someone has lifted the lid off a chest you forgot you owned. You find the few you know by name and the many you love by feel. Orion shoulders the world again. The North Star holds court. A thin smear of light, the path of the Milky Way, reminds you that even dust can learn to shine if it travels far and together. Men who cannot write can read this sky. They do? And they sleep? You think of everything the historians like to count, guns and flags and coins and dead, and you realize the ledger they miss is the one the body keeps, the blister that opened and closed without complaint. The breath shared under a single coarse blanket, the 2-hour sleep that delivered a man back to himself when there was almost no self left. You think the human animal is a poor thing and a magnificent one. You think there are worse religions than endurance. The ship bears south, no trumpets, no curtain, just the faithful machinery of intention wind become curve of sail. curve become pull of line, pull become curve of wake, and behind it all, the simplest miracle, a wooden bowl that floats when it should not. The night is merciful enough to be ordinary. A rope knocks a mast with the rhythm of a sleeping heart. A man coughs once, the dry kind that means mending. Another answers with the toss of a blanket edge in his direction without waking. The cat opens one eye, decides against prophecy, and sleeps. You breathe with the ship. The sea returns the breath. Somewhere beyond the rim of water is land. It will come when it comes harbor. Stink and baker's heat. Church bells whose ropes have never seen frost. Pears bruising in boys' hands. But that is a tomorrow you do not need to borrow. Tonight is a good night. The kind that makes a story quiet enough to last. You close your eyes and let the motion rock the marrow, the way it rocked dead fear out and rocked a small, stubborn hope in. The cold is a memory, the wind is a companion. The past is a chapter with a finger in it, and the ship, which has always been more alive than anyone admits, hums that old lullaby, the one built of oak and tar and breath, and will, and the sea takes the harmony like it was written for her. Sleep. Then the darkest water has been crossed. Let the wood remember the warmth of your hand. Let the stars keep their appointments. Let the bell find you when it's time. Until then, drift south, and human and alive,